So welcome back. This afternoon, we will continue our discussions on the future of educational planning with 3 panel sessions. Just for your headsets, I'd like to remind everyone that French interpretation, if you need it, is on channel 5, English on 6, and Spanish on 7. If you are joining us online and you need interpretation, click the globe icon and select a language. So this first panel is on thematic priority 4. How can calls for transparency and new forms of financing enable planning to meet its objectives? To moderate this important topic, I am pleased to welcome my colleague, Alejandra Cardini. Alejandra is the Knowledge Management and Mobilization Coordinator at IIEP's Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean in Buenos Aires. Welcome, Alejandra.
Thank you. Well, perhaps we can have the panelists here as well, so we can start the panel. Well, first of all, happy birthday, IIEP. It's great to be here. I've been hearing all the conference since yesterday, and I learned a lot about our work and especially about our history. So thank you very much for the previous speakers. I'm very honored to moderate this panel today with this distinguished panelist. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And yesterday it was mentioned several times, the fact that planning and management is not a very sexy topic. And I was thinking the topic we're going to deal right now is not only not sexy, but is also very uncomfortable. And there are not many international organizations that have been working this topic because it is an uncomfortable topic. Although this topic is always present when you work from the government side in all the internal discussions, we talk a lot about corruption. When it comes to being with partners in formal meetings or formal arrangements or formal projects, it tends to distinguish and you can't get to work these topics. So in a way, I think it's, even in some meetings, I think that talking about corruption can be offensive to the people to whom you speak. And I think it's very brave from IIEP, the fact that this has been a topic that has been very present from the beginning, but especially in the last 20 years. So I want to start this panel inviting Muriel to the session. She is IIEP's program on ethics and corruption in IIEP in education. And she has worked on research products, technical cooperation, and training on these topics in the last 20 years. So we're going to start this panel with this overview of the work that IIEP has been doing. And then we're going to switch to the government's view and how to impact on these topics from government, to then move to aspects related to budgeting, and then to civil society and accountability. And all these topics, accountability, corruption, ethics, the role of civil society, are very linked. So we're going to try and link them on in the topic. So Muriel, if you want to start, she has the challenge to speak about 20 years in 10 minutes. So let's see how that works.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. So I'm going to try to present to you a little bit the journey of IIEP over the past few years related to the topic of ethics and corruption in the education sector. So the very starting point for the Institute to start working on this topic had to do very much with our observations on the grounds and working with countries. We knew, and everyone knew, that there are a number of things that are happening on the ground that can affect access, such as the number of teaching hours reduced due to ghost teachers and unjustified absenteeism, or the payment of illegal fees to be admitted to schools, even when education is supposed to be free of charge. Obviously, this has some effect on access. Similarly, when you're talking about quality, there are a number of issues that clearly have an impact on quality, such as low teaching capacity that can be due to corruption or bribery or favoritism in the recruitment process of staff. There can be issues related to a number of textbooks, teaching materials that are not made available to the people for different reasons. And for instance, the phenomenon of the librairie de parterre that people from Francophone Africa knows very well. When talking about equity, there are also issues related to less resources, sometimes in priority areas, because in those priority areas, the bargaining power of the districts, the local authorities, the school authorities tends to be lower than in richer areas. And justify credentials to students who can pay, schools meals not available to those who need the most. All of these have a clear impact on equity, and also talking about ethics, because the whole of education is also about ethics, it's also about values, it's also about citizenships. Well, how can you talk about it if you don't take into consideration issues related to bias and discrimination, gender violence, and so on? And so the very initial step was to say, well, how can we talk about planning if we are not talking about all of those different issues that we know are happening within the education sector and within the education system? And so, well, the starting point for us and in our exchange again with countries was to look for facts and for evidence, because obviously when you are talking about those issues, people tell you, well, everyone knows that's a kind of rule of the games, but you don't have fact and figures. So we don't know how much, what proportion, and so on and so forth. So one of the very first things that we did as part of this project was to try to review tools that can help document hard facts and other sources of data, as a way also to enrich traditional ways of carrying out sectoral diagnosis within the education sector and various forms of fact findings. So we looked for fact finding surveys, such as there was an audit at the time that had been carried out related to staff management in Colombia by the head of the city of Colombia that then became the minister from Colombia, in a very interesting way, step-by-step process. We've been looking a lot at the public expenditure tracking survey that at the time had just been experimented and experienced by the World Bank in a number of countries, including the case of Uganda that most of you knows. And we have been working with the World Bank team to train a number of countries to make use of those tracking surveys, including Burkina Faso, Ghana, Uganda after the very first one, and so on. We looked also at other types of survey that had been also experimented by the bank at the time on quantitative service delivery surveys that can help you find some facts on issues such as unjustified teacher absenteeisms, ghost teachers, and so on. And well, India was an interesting case. But we looked also at perception surveys, because clearly there are a number of dimensions that you cannot capture through fact-finding surveys. And so we looked at the report card surveys, for instance, that had been experienced by Transparency International Bangladesh to collect information on the illegal fees collected from parents, with a very interesting methodology that they had been doing in different upazilias, which are the different districts from Bangladesh. We have also paid attention to surveys on exam practices that were piloted at the time through the Open Society Foundation in Central and Eastern Europe. And gradually also we developed, in conjunction with the OECD, a kind of new methodology related to corruption risk assessment, or that we sometimes also call integrity assessments, trying to do some kind of systematic analysis of risk that exists per domain of educational planning and management. That's something that we piloted with the OECD first in Serbia, then we did it in Ukraine, and myself, I did it then in Kosovo, in Georgia, in Guinea, and in other places. But then, oops, if we can get to the next one. Yeah, but the thing, of course, is not only to document the phenomenon. The thing also is to look for strategies, is to look for policies, and to look to positive examples. You cannot only put the fingers at what's wrong into the system, but also to look for interesting strategies and policies to improve transparency and accountability. So what we have tried to do over time also is to document a number of strategies that had been introduced in a number of countries to try to improve transparency and accountability. And so, for instance, we documented different types of funding reforms and different forms of allocation of funds to the schools using different types of formula, and try to see what are the different types of risk in terms of transparency and accountability that are attached to different formula funding. We did this, well, we were interested by the student basket that had been introduced in Lithuania, but also in Brazil, in the UK, in Australia, and so on. We paid also attention, for instance, of reforms to the teacher management in terms of try to clean the list of teachers in the case of Sierra Leone, public procurement reforms in Colombia, exam reforms, and especially the standardized assessment system that had been introduced in a number of countries from former Soviet Union and from Central European countries, and also looking at control mechanisms, reforms, audit, Q&A, and so on. Obviously, that's a domain where there is no magic tales and you cannot improve the whole of the sector at the same time. But there are windows of opportunity sometimes to enter these issues through a specific domains. At some point, it can be exam, and another point, it can be public procurement, and another time, issues related to textbooks and so on. But with a kind of commonalities between all of these is that there is a combination of measures that needs to be considered in each of those domains in terms of creating and revision regulatory systems to make them clear, to make them transparent, to make them known to everyone, in terms of strengthening management capacities at different levels, including in very specific domains such as accounting, control mechanisms, auditing, and so on, and the encouragement of enhanced ownership, and including through public access to information and mobilization of citizens and of civil society. Clearly, in terms of limits and challenges, there are many, as one could imagine. Well, the first one is obviously that it's not through technical approaches that you are going to solve a number of political problems and political issues. And if there is no political will, then obviously that will be that's difficult to move on, but still, it doesn't mean that nothing can be done. And we have a number of examples in countries where we have been able to do things related, for instance, to exam at some point, related to codes of conduct for teachers, and at other points related to integrity in higher education in other domains and so on. Second limit and challenges is that the world, I would say, of governance, anti-corruption is a very different one compared to that of education specialists. And so those are two domains that are not necessarily talking to each other. That's true at country level. That's true also sometimes within civil society. Not always. There are other examples, such as some Transparency International chapters, for instance, that have this kind of combination of governance, anti-corruption, and education. And that's true also among the development partners. Usually you have the governance people on the one hand, and you have the education people on the other hand, and those two do not talk together. And also the issue of mainstreaming really transparency and accountability into planning and management at each of the steps. I don't think that's really something that we have still been able to achieve, but hopefully within the next few years, we will be able to do that in a more effective way, I would say. But I would say the kind of common line, I would say, in all of the strategies that we have been documented that has proved successful in different contexts has to do with the power of public information and the power of citizen engagement, which is in fact what is making really the difference in terms of changing the reality of what is happening. So that's why in recent years we have paid attention to those issues, public access to information, citizen engagement, through a research that we carried out recently on open school data. And building also on the country commitment now on information, with more and more countries that have adopted public laws of information that has become compulsory for everyone to implement, including the ministries of education. We have had also recent research on open government in the education sector, and again, building on the country's commitment through the OGP plans. I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is an open government partnership initiative that has been launched worldwide with a number of commitment of OGP plans that has been adopted by different countries, and on which we can build also when talking about open government and citizen engagement. We are planning a new research on perspective opened by new technologies in that field, and another one on civil society engagement in policy and planning. And I think this issue of citizen engagements echoes back to what was discussed this morning and what was also said by Sarah. Obviously, there are a number of risks attached to it in terms of misinformation, in terms of manipulations. It has to do a lot with all of the discussion that we can have on the evolutions of our societies from a democratic perspective. But still, I think it's very important for an institute such as IIEP to pay attention to systems of interactions between the frontline service delivery and the higher decisions-making levels to achieve SDG 4, as we will be also hearing from the other panelists, and especially from Rukmini from the civil society side. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation. You managed really well, 20 years in 10 minutes. And now we're going to pass the word to Virginia Bourrienne. She's going to talk from a totally different perspective. She's now the director of Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis, but her presentation is going to draw on her past experience in government as Vice Minister of Education and Chief Advisor of the President of the Republic of Lithuania. So she will address her own experience in combating corruption in education and mentioning some of the impacts and challenges of that work. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello to everybody. After the lunch, it's not easy to talk and not easy to listen. I guess sleepy time for such a topic. Let me start with asking you to think about your photo albums. What are the most important events in your life that are reflected in your photo albums? Birth, right? Wedding, graduation from secondary school, graduation from university, if any, your first day or your kid's first day at school. Am I correct? So education is one of the most important things in our lives, in our life success, as well as this morning it was shown in the video. It's a fact of prosperity of any country. So let me start with togetherness. We have decided to create our public services together, be it education, health care, welfare system, defense, right? And we fund it together through the public budget. We pay taxes, businesses pay taxes, and this is how we deal with our education as well. But resources are not enough usually in any rich or poor, developed or developing country. And the expectations, private expectations, are very high. So that's why, we have a gray zone. The gray zone is the zone where education meets corruption, or corruption meets education, to be more precise. And corruption takes place in different forms. It's bribery, it's favoritism, it's nepotism, it is plagiarism, it is untransparent lobbying, untransparent behavior, and any other violation of integrity of education. What's integrity of education? Integrity of education is actions, values, methods, principles that we want to be in place in our education system. All those buzzwords for today's student already mentioned, equity, equality, quality. Yes, they are buzzwords, but also they are vital principles that should not be violated via corruption. Even I'm looking at Mark Bray, and even private tutoring is also in some kind a violation of those principles. To think about education is very simple and very complex. It's simple. In the middle of lower screen, there are curriculum, resources, processes. That is all education is all about. But on the other hand, it's very complex. Every education system exists in a power field, global and local, global and national power field. We are talking about IIEP work in dealing with planning, but also every education system is also somehow influenced by other international organizations, be it World Bank or other development bank, be it UNESCO, OECD, EU. At least my country is the member of all those organizations, and also influenced by international NGOs like Transparency International, different educational associations, and how it is connected with corruption in education. I have no much time left, I guess, but I think that the most important for us is in the bottom left corner. we see here national, cultural, inherited traditions, and traditions sometimes are just stereotypes. For example, nepotism, favoritism, until recently was considered a norm in most societies, and not a violation of social justice. Lobbying, if non-transparent and non-regulated, also breaches transparency of education. Whistleblowers, in some cases, are not protected and even shamed in some societies. So we trust or do not trust in our governments, but in Lithuania, at least, opinion polls show that education is trusted much more than the government's policy, politicians, parliament, and parties. So we have an obligation to meet our objectives we set for the education system and to see less violation of those principles. Lithuania is a very small, well, it's a small country at the Baltic Sea. In the timeline, well, 3 million, around 3 million population is in Lithuania. And we think that we are the winners. We restored our independence in 1990. We became member of United Nations in 91. We became member of NATO and European Union in 2004. We are also known as the first president in Europe was impeached and left the office because of corruption. Also, the rector of second biggest university had to leave his office because of plagiarism. We are not proud of this, of course. And the Minister of Education, Science and Sports this year left the office because of improper use of funds. But it means that we are monitoring what happens in the country. Are the processes just and fair? What are the, how we improve our transparency, how we fight in education with the corruption? I can say that we have different measures in place. Education management information system was developed with the help of the World Bank because we wanted loan from the bank. Also, we introduced so-called student basket funding in secondary and higher education. Student basket is when money follows the student. And it was the case in 2002 that salaries of teachers were late, and the per student amount was very different, differently funded in different municipalities. So the buzzword usually is decentralization, but what we made the centralizing step here. So now the student goes with his basket, meaning his ID code is connected with certain school, and all the schools gets money dependent on number of students. There are certain coefficients for rural schools or for minority schools as well. In higher education, student basket was introduced in 2012 because earlier it was distributed as lump sum to universities based on previous year financing. That was not very good, process. So now, where goes the student, which university he enters, the amount of money for concrete program for this seat goes to that university. We also introduced one channel access to higher education, and it is the same as the Matura examination. Also, the entrance to universities is done now via one channel agency. It's consortium of universities. Every student submits his 6 preferences of the programs to this consortium organization, and he gets offers according to his merit from the Matura examination. So the same summer, they have not just school graduation and entrance examinations, only one set of examinations, which is both for Matura and for access for admission. Also, we have introduced anti-corruption education as extracurriculum program, materials developed. Also, they are even translated into few foreign languages. So this helps us to decrease corruption. But those things are centralized. And also we face unintended side effects of our steps to fight with corruption. Standardization in education has those side effects. Standardization of education financing leads to small school closures, unfortunately. Standardization of student assessment leads to the teaching to the test, which is not a good thing. One-channel access to higher education has also side effects, as closure of small universities, limited access for the poor, tensions between study programs for quota. Usually it's engineering and the sciences versus humanities, social sciences and arts, which is also not good for the integrity of the society. ICT and digitalization of education has a very high cost, I mean in financing, of implementation and further maintenance. And direct implementation of recommendations from international organizations can lead to the fragmentation of education system. So I have no more time. I could tell you much more, but here I stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. We have a question for both of you regarding corruption, but perhaps we can do it very briefly so we have enough time to our panelists. But the question would be, I'm trying to link what is happening and what we're talking about today and what we talked about yesterday and the different topics IIEP works, is trying to link this topic with digital education or the digital era, I would say. And so, Muriel, perhaps you can have some insights on how do you think digitalization could help or not help, or what the challenges are for this specific topic.
I can say that in the different strategies that we documented over time, the role of new technologies already was there, and there were different initiatives that were interested from this perspective. And there are different ways to use the new technologies to improve transparency and accountability. One has to do with the automatization of a number of procedures within the management of the education system. And this can have to do with, well, teacher assignment, as we have heard yesterday from Gregory, and different initiatives going on in Latin America. It can have to do with exams. And it's true that through this standardization test that was developed, for instance, in Central Europe, the use also of new technologies and automatizing the whole process of management of the exams from the beginning until the end. Public procurement, obviously, is also domains where, well, digitalizations and automatization of the procedures is key. The whole issue that have to do with public access to information and the fact that you put online portals where people can have direct access to funding issues, for instance, to school data and so on, is something that is very interesting. But it's true that I think during the COVID-19 era, there has been really a shift in terms of the new technologies, including with the capacity to reach out to many people at the same time, to shorten the route with the users and the people on the ground and on the field. That was totally different than what existed before that. Plus the use of artificial intelligence, as we've heard also yesterday, that is opening new ground. So which means that there are a number of innovations, I think, that are worthwhile to document. And in this case, that would echo a little bit what Amélie was saying yesterday. For instance, in terms of satellite systems to control the location and the building of schools, in terms of data portals to inform citizens about the amounts of funds that are being allocated to the schools, in terms of online platforms to report informal payments made by parents to the schools. So that's something something, for instance, that we have documented recently in the case of Ukraine, that was before the start of the war, in terms of mobile phones and chatbot to check the quantity and quality of textbooks and school meals. And we have such examples, for instance, in the Philippines, artificial intelligence to carry out automated audits. And we have a blog, if you're interested, on the ETICO website that is on ethics and corruption in education, that shows in a number of Nordic countries how now they are shifting the whole process of audit, making use of artificial intelligence. So there are many different ways, I think, that is further worth investigating.
Very interesting. Would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, I think that digitalization at the moment is one of the strongest instruments for eradicating corruption in admission processes, distribution of resources, funding of research on competitive basis. Also, I can mention Estonia, the other multi-country. So 99% of their public services are digitalized. So this makes them, they think so, this makes them one of the least corrupt countries in the world, according to Corruption Perception Index. So I think that the human factor should remain in education when it concerns curriculum, teaching, and all other services should be as much digitalized as possible.
Thank you very, very much for those insights. So we are now going to move to another topic. So we're going to invite Jean-Claude Navananier. I hope I said it properly. And he's the leader of IIEP Education Finance Cluster. And the trigger question for you and for your presentation would be, IIEP has recently launched this new action research program that focuses on performance-based budgeting. And if you could perhaps tell us in 10 minutes what conclusions you draw so far between the link of planning, budgeting, and implementation of education plans.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Je vais parler en français. On m'a dit qu'il est traducteur. Excellent travail.
I'm going to speak in French because we have interpreters with us. We have heard a lot about the historical aspects of funding and financial governance in broad terms. What I would like to talk about is what we are doing, what we would like to be doing in the next coming years. Of course, IEP acts on a need base. So we don't have any choice but to adapt to what people expect, what countries expect from us. As of today, education funding is faced with major hurdles. But it's always been the case. I was very happy when I was asked to prepare this presentation, and it led me to look at the various reports that had been developed during previous symposia on education funding. And I realized that there has been a number of different challenges, a number of different crises, and periods during which funding was more or less available. But there's something undeniable. Education funding has always been a major challenge, and the ability to mobilize and channel more money for education has always been a problem. Sometimes some of those reports in the past tended to focus on one aspect or another. But I think we need to look at all of those issues together. I think everyone is very much aware of what's happening now. Countries are faced with major funding challenges, which has been made worse recently by multiple crises, ranging from COVID and the consequences in terms of inflation globally, as well as humanitarian crises and the climate crisis. This has a wide-ranging consequences for countries. I looked at the GEM reports that published latest data on expenditure per learner in various countries. This gives you an idea of the wide range of needs. To put things simply, low-income countries spend about $200 per learner as opposed to middle-income countries that spend $2,000, and countries that are deemed high income spend $10,000 per learner. Even within the countries, a number of variations occur. In the first group, countries are faced with various challenges. They don't have a lot of domestic resources to start with. And in many countries, there is also a demographic, a population-related issue that is often overlooked in our analyses. Any gain in economic growth is eroded and undermined by the population growth. That is to say that more investment is needed in education, in terms of public spending, contributions to development aid, and families also make a difference, depending on whether they can or cannot help with the fees. So ever since we started discussing yesterday, we have been talking about sector planning, and at IIEP, we have been doing a lot of work on how to better support countries to implement their policies, the policies that they have developed under the framework of their sector plans. Of course, there are many ways to look at this. However, there's no direct correlation between the amount of resources that are fed into the system and the results from the system. Yesterday, we talked about middle tier support. We also talked about the different ways of supporting implementation. We have launched this in a new initiative a while ago that is trying to look at budgets. There seems to be a consensus that public budgets is one of the, if not the only way to look to influence plans in implementation. A plan cannot be implemented without a budget. It is that simple. So the question that we've been asking ourselves is how to better align objectives and public policies covered by sector plans on the one hand, and on the other hand, the outcomes from a budgetary viewpoint. This initiative has been targeting this lack of alignment between these two levels. We have been asking ourselves the following question. How can we make sure that political ambitions are translated into budgetary allocations? This has to do with budgetary planning, the initial stages of budget development that oftentimes are quite systematic and are simply a translation of what the previous year budget looked like. We've been also looking at ways of looking how implementation reports are taken into account and how there's a great plan to start with at the beginning of a year where sometimes a great budget has been developed, but the implementation tends to end up focusing on something else as the year goes by. I'm not even talking about embezzlement here, but it has to do with poor governance. Here I'm talking about situations where, for some reason or another, the implementation does not exactly follow suit after the initial ambitions had been set at the beginning of the year. Another thing that I wanted to mention about this work that we've been carrying out. I wanted to mention a number of early findings. This work started at the beginning of the year, And we already have identified a couple of findings that will help us provide with technical support in order to solve some of the bottlenecks. So very shortly, very quickly, there is a number of institutional hurdles. It has to do with what we've been talking about, the politicization of administration. In other words, the administration is increasingly politicized. We said that we need a sprinkling of political within planning, but we can't make this a 100% political process. This will have an impact on the whole budgetary cycle. The development of budgets and budget drafting is supposed to be a political process. It needs to focus on being more efficient, on deciding what needs to be stopped, what needs to be scaled up. And these are all very political decisions. But the problem is that sometimes it doesn't actually focus on performance. It's way too political, and that can translate into delays and bad decisions. There's also the issue of execution and implementation. Poor performance can also add up on top of practices that are deeply rooted in the field. I'm going to quickly mention the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability, which can be something that is difficult to identify if it's, again, deeply rooted in local practices. Because those who are supposed to assess it, to monitor it, to identify it, are the same people who are subject to lack of transparency. So what the IIEP is going to do in the coming years is to create tools and approaches to understand and to diagnose what the bottlenecks are in this planning process. We also, as I said, want to set up programs to develop and support technical cooperation to support everyone at every level, both ranging from the technicians to the decision makers. We want to make sure that we can find the right leverage to foster good reform. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop here, and I'm sure that during our discussion, we'll have time to delve deeper into that subject.
Merci beaucoup. So we have a question from the audience for you. So the question would be, all the themes related, well, to corruption as well, but yeah, of course. All the related aspects to budgeting are usually not decided at the ministries of education. They imply broader decisions, broader political actions, and IIP's main audience are the ministries of education. So do you think this is a challenge to address and have impact in budgeting issues? How do you see this regarding our role and our impact possibilities?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We've been talking about it quite a lot since yesterday. This has several sides. Of course, it has to do with the limitations of what we can do at IIEP. But what we can do is to come up with tools, with guidance, both technical tools and methodology guidance to better understand what is at stake and to better diagnose and to come up with ways to target these issues. Now, in terms of guidance, I think we are lucky enough to have practitioners with us who are very good at this. We really thought that we would have time to give the floor to some people, some of our colleagues, some Segeda, who are in the rooms right now. It would be much more interesting to see what their view is and to hear about what they have to say, because they are the main practitioners here. Segeda, would you like to say a word?
Merci.
Thank you. Yes, I could say a word about the political aspect, or maybe I could reflect on the experience of Burkina Faso over the past 2 or 3 years. We have started a new process that has been deemed a depolitization. And a lot of people have been quite hostile. They have been arguing that depoliticizing budget making does not make any sense. And this is, I think, something that is a call of caution. We need to refrain from confusing politician and politics on the one hand, and on the other hand, the taking into account of political aspects into the education planning. I think corruption and transparency are key, and that's for sure. I think I would like to get back to what Muriel Poisson was saying. I think it made very evident that corruption is a multifaceted phenomenon, both in education and out of education. When you see that service providers who are supposed to do their job and don't for no understandable reason is a major issue. You have resources, your job is to turn them into outcomes. And when you don't, that's a major hurdle. And it can have an impact on resource mobilization, both domestic, but especially when they are gathered, when resources are mobilized with technical partners. Our experience tells us that we need to have the right mechanisms in place. And sometimes you need a legal framework. The example of Burkina Faso shows that it can be useful to come up with processes, with tools, with concrete mechanisms that will help stakeholders to meet on a regular basis and to exchange on outcomes. Stakeholders need to be held accountable. If you have budgets, if you are given resources, I think it is part of your job to be held accountable. It is part of your job to come up with explanations as to how the money was spent. So unfortunately, we don't have much time, but I would otherwise be able to explain to you how things are done in Burkina Faso. I could tell you about the involvement of civil society as well as government stakeholders. They are in a position to raise the alarm about concerning results that are not on a par with budgets that have been allocated. And that, I think, is very important. Thank you very much.
So we're going to take the civil society aspect of this, and we're going to invite our last panelist today, Rukmini Nagargi. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation in India. And she will talk about the role of civil society, a key element in education policy and accountability, and about a specific initiative that is ASER. That is funny because it has one meaning for her, and in Spanish it means do, to do, and in Hindu is impact. So we're going to hear about that experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So there's a disclaimer, I'm not from a ministry, not even from the government, never been trained at IIEP. Although I was on the governing board for 4 years, so that was one kind of training. My organization in India is called Pratham, which means first. But since I'm last on my panel, I have some advantages. And the advantages is that you can pull from things that people on the panel have said, and also many things that we've been hearing since yesterday. And I think I'm very happy that many people, from Fernando to Sylvia to Sarah and Pauline, all mentioned that there is a role to be played by people who are outside this room, people from the dark side like me. So that gives me some place to talk about this. So I will start. I know we have very little time, but I wanted to just put a little bit of a context to the story I will tell. Pratham, our organization was working from about 1996, on basically helping our mission is every child in school and learning well. Now, the every child in school in 96, in 2000 was well understood. I mean, while there was still work to be done, people knew what to do. The learning well, I think, was not that, forget about well. The learning was still something that everybody was grappling with. And we worked largely in urban areas for the first 4 or 5 years of our existence. And then we went to the rural areas. Now, when we went to the villages, we felt it was important to understand the context, village by village, before you try to think of what are possible solutions. So we would do something called the village report card, which was a very simple, and I will show it to you in a minute, a reading and a math assessment. I will show it to you in a bit. A very simple, can you read an oral one-on-one assessment, much simpler than EGRA, for those who know EGRA, and a simple reading and math assessment. And you would go from house to house, from neighborhood to neighborhood doing this. And as you began to do it in the household, a lot of people would join. There would be a lot of questions and conjectures and assumptions. And after a couple of days, depending on the size of the village, you would put it all together and have a village meeting and discuss the nature of the problem. Are all children in school? Can most of them read simple things? Can they do basic arithmetic? And having discussed the problem, then you would start thinking about what is the solution that the village can provide. So that is what we had been doing for many hundred villages to really get a sense of what is the problem on the ground and what kind of local or general solution can be applied. Oh, I think I'm going wrong. Yes. Now, because I'm coming to IIEP and a lot of experts in the audience, I felt there should be a framework of what we learned from here. And so, in a very basic way, you can see that this is kind of a cycle we went through, that especially for problems that are not particularly visible. So the problem of not being in school is very visible. People can see it. You can see the children everywhere. But the problem about learning, especially for kids who are in school, is quite invisible. So you can't get worked up about it or hold anybody accountable unless you can actually see the problem. And to see the problem, you have to generate some curiosity. And in countries, at least like ours, I don't think reports make a big difference because there are so many reports. It is what you experience yourself that leads you to a better understanding of the problem. So you can see, I'm not going to read all this out for you, but it was important to engage people first in order to have a view about what is the problem you want to see. In terms of data as well, we learned that it is very easy to be influenced by anecdotes and your personal experience. And then you see data as some big aggregate that happens. India is a big country. So if you say India has a problem, almost nobody is worried because somebody else in India will worry about it. But when there is a problem in your neighborhood, when the data unit and the kid are both known to you, it's often the case that you begin to really engage and say, yes, Muriel, I know her, and I'm surprised she can't read, but she goes to school every day. So I think there was a real need to move from this anecdote to aggregate. And I think, at least in our context, these need to be quite close to each other for you to appreciate that data actually represents the reality that you're seeing on the ground. And then, at least in our village report card case, nobody was going to come from somewhere to help you. So you had to discuss and figure out what to do. And I think that's an important part, that what solution can you implement? What can you bring on the table before you go and ask other people, systems, schools, village councils about what you can do? So this, I think, was a kind of a cycle we used. And we saw a lot of action at the local level. It took time, but you could see there was action at the local level. So the question was, if this is working at a local level, can it be taken to a bigger level? Now, 2005 is when we started thinking about how to take it from this local level. A couple of years of doing local level. 2005, various reasons to decide to do it nationwide. And here are some of the reasons. MDGs were still very much in vogue. Everybody worried about schooling. Our schooling levels were high and getting higher. Learning was really not still something that people spoke about. Our government, we had a new government in 2004 at the central federal level, started speaking about outcomes and outcomes, not just outlays. And we had a new education cess that was imposed. So I think the context for which you do certain things at a certain time is also important. And so in trying to decide what to do, we had a few very simple, I think, lessons learned from the village level. And you can see what they are. The tool, keep it very simple so that it's easy to engage. Do it in the household because firstly, there are children to be found in many different kinds of schools. And if you do a school-based survey, you find only the children in that school. There's also there's also chronic absenteeism. So even if you're enrolled in school, often you may not be in school. And I think finally the situation was that there is a lot of talk when you do it outside the school. In the school, people expect certain things, assessments happen in school, but when you go around in the village, everybody wants to know what's going on and why and how and so on and so forth. And you want that discussion if you want to get people involved. And so we decided that this would happen. India has 600 plus districts. And so for a country of that size to have any influence or impact, you have to do something big because everybody's used to 5 districts and 1 state and so on. And so we decided, can we do this very simple thing on a representative sample for each district? Because the district is also the unit at which plans are made, budgets are allocated, and decisions are taken. So here's this tool. Here's the tool. Very simple, available in your own local language, letters, words, a simple grade 1 paragraph, and a little story. And the math one is just number recognition and a few operations. Quickly, I wanted to give you a sense of what the data looks like. You can have this for a village, you can have it for a district, you can have it for the country. This is our country data for 2022. The sample is very large, as you can see, 700,000 children. That is sometimes more people than in some countries. And you see that grade 3, only 20% of children in grade 3 are at grade level. If I take my last column as being sort of at grade 3 level, by the end of grade 2, you should be able to read a story. We see that only 20% of our children in grade 3 are at grade level. And this ties back to what Sylvia was saying, that it is not just that you want to improve on average. I mean, this is that by age 8, you have given up on 80% of your children. They are not going to go ahead because all the teaching in our schools is at grade level from grade level textbooks. And so this is, I would say that if you had to think of SDG or SDG 4.1 point something or the other, is this. And if you don't get this done, forget about all your other SDGs. And here we have only 7 years left to go from 80% to 100, to go from 20% to 100%. Okay, I have 1 minute left. So this method of actually assessing and creating this spread from India to many countries. Sarah Rutter, who's not in the room right now, was actually one of the main people taking it across the Indian Ocean to East Africa. It has also gone to many other countries since then. Now, here's my last slide. We've been doing this assessment every year from 2005 to 2014, every year, large samples. And in every district, there is a local organization who actually carries it out and discussed very widely in the media as well as in actual forums. After 2014, we've been doing it alternate years because the story is more or less not changing. And alongside with this, we tried to plot what else is happening in the country. So on the top side, you can see various kinds of government action. Can it all be attributed to this? Maybe not, but I think significant amount can be attributed to a repeated reminder year on year that as a country where we are. And we have a new education policy in 2020, which actually says on page 8, it's a 56-page document. On page 8, it says that if all children do not get foundational literacy and numeracy by grade 3, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant. So I would say that's as clear a statement of a national priority as is possible. And we don't have 7 years. our country has given itself 5 years to be able to achieve this. And the race is on. And then I would say that there's lots of other action that has happened. We ourselves implement a major solution to this problem called teaching at the right level. Tools are used in many places. So I'd like to just end by saying that I think can the bottom influence the top? I think it can, obviously, because we are there at the bottom. But I do think that this third pillar that everybody has referred to, partnership, people, community, coalition, is often forgotten when plans are made. And I think this is a huge example. If you take all of the citizen-led assessments currently in the world, many million children are being assessed and discussions happening, and all being done by local people. So IIEP in the next 20 years, do study things like this, because I think these are the things that are going to make a difference in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So they gave us a few more minutes as we started late, not many, but I think we could do that last question that we were thinking about, and it would be thinking of one idea or one recommendation that perhaps you think is the strongest one, and defining to what audience you would give that recommendation.
Specific, together with civil society organizations that are the ones doing school report cards and mobilizing communities based on those school report cards, and met those people discussed among ministry people and civil society organizations. And in fact, they had a lot to share, and ministry people had a lot to learn from all of those social accountability mechanisms that had been built through the communities. And ourselves, we are trying to move on, Rukmini, that will make you happy on this issue by working now as part of the Education Outload Network. I don't know if you heard about that, but that's a big network of civil society organizations across the world that has been supported by GPE in different regions. And we're working with big coalitions of NGOs. We're talking also, Pratham is in an almost NGO, but other big coalitions of NGOs to develop their capacities in the area of educational planning and management, to make them more active actors, even at central levels, and being part of the planning process and all of the discussions related to planning. And at the same time, we're working with these civil society organizations, well, to make them more aware about transparency and accountability issues, share with them a number of tools related to transparency and accountability, and trying a little bit to make these connections between public administration and civil society. The very last one, I just wanted to mention that these very initial things that we have developed on transparency and accountability was made with the support of Norway, because I see that Berat is in the room. And so just wanted to mention that the whole process that I described was very much made at the very beginning, because there was this support from Norway and from the Norwegian Corporation.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. No, there is someone in the back. You wanted to say something? We have to be really, really quick. Yeah, thank you.
And I've known each other for a long time, and of course, very impressive presentation as always. You started actually at a time when we first met was around 2000, and you were working on Pratham's efforts, and I remember those discussions. My question is, I remember those days when it was very difficult for you to have, you were not on page 8 of the new education policy. You were not even on the page. What are the lessons you can give maybe to IIEP about the challenges that you, maybe not only in India, but maybe some of the other experiences under the PAL network, of how you get that 80% focus from national leaders, which they don't always go for, and also resisted when you were just starting out? If you have an example or two, maybe.
So first of all, we are not on page 8, but India is on page 8. And I think that's an important one, because you need to have, and how people, make policies, I think a whole Netflix series on its own. But I do think a persistent effort year on year, collecting the same kind of information, involving a very large network of ordinary people, I think goes a long way. And I say this because, firstly, I say this because of the experience, but I also think that over a period of time, I now see in middle layers of government, there are a lot of people who did Asar when they were students. And so you have to get some of these things. It's an adventure actually, because many times you don't know your own backyard. And so when you go and do something very simple, you learn a lot. So a large part of our district partners, for example, 600 districts, last year, 375 were teacher training colleges who felt like this was an important part of the training of their pre-service teachers. So Dan, I don't know how it got to anywhere, and I can't speak for any other than ours, but I think it is this, if you have a large enough and continuous force talking about something, we have to thank the media. The media picks up because it's very easy to pick up headlines. So at one level, people get very upset. At another level, there is also, I feel over the last 10 years, media has also understood that you need to go, deeper. And having this long run annual data that is being collected from a representative sample of all children, and that's all children is important, I think helped us a lot during COVID to realize what had happened during COVID as compared to before, what is the recovery like, and so on. So.
Thank you very much for that. So we're going to close with an idea from Jean-Claude then.
Merci beaucoup. Très honoré des clôtures.
Thank you very much for allowing me to conclude. I'm going to say something that is very much in line with what Muriel was saying. She was highlighting how central administration was. I still believe that education systems are extremely complex creatures that bring together a number of various organisms, various stakeholders. And it's important to pressure, to push where you need in order to obtain more resources. But nevertheless, it remains a public administration. As long as performance will not be core, as long as these administrations won't be performance-oriented and goal-oriented, it will be very difficult to make progress. And therefore, I think it's important to strengthen, to build capacity among administrations who are in charge of administrative processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to the panel for this very interesting discussion. So we now turn straight to the fifth thematic priority. We're getting through them quite fast now. How can planning and management help education systems adapt to crises, climate change, and natural hazards? We are delighted to welcome back the moderator for this session, Pauline Rose. Pauline is Professor of International Education at the University of Cambridge. And prior to this role, she was Director of UNESCO's Education for All Global Monitoring Report. Pauline is also, of course, a member of the IIEP Governing Board. Thank you and welcome back, Pauline. Over to you.
Honourable Minister and colleagues, this is, I think, a really important session looking at issues of planning in crisis situations. And before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to start with a few words of reflection. I think we're here to celebrate, but we're also here to reflect. And I don't think we can talk about issues around crisis without reflection. As we've been hearing over the past 2 days, planning is about people and it's about humanity. As Fernando said yesterday, planning happens in the context of volatility and unpredictability. And that's how IIEP was established, in the context in which it was established and the context in which it continues to work. This is obviously particularly poignant in the context of the current crises that we're witnessing. So I want to just ask if we could have a minute's silence to think about the almost 100 UNRWA colleagues who have been killed in recent times and the children who have been attacked and killed in realising their right to education. So thank you for having a minute's silence before we start. So IIEP works in some of these most difficult situations together with governments. And I think this is sort of, for me, one of the things I have particularly known IIEP for along the years. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce this panel. We have some excellent speakers here, and we have His Excellency Mr. Azmi Mahmoud Mahavas from the Ministry of Education and Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research in Jordan. We have Christian Stoff from the Monitoring and Evaluation part of the Education Cannot Wait, which obviously was established in recent times, recognizing how much education was missing from these humanitarian situations. Things have improved, but we might be hearing perhaps still not enough, more to be done. And from our very own IIP, Leonora McEwen, who is the lead of IIP's UNESCO's Equity and Resilience Cluster, and has been with IIP for almost 20 years, so has a wealth of knowledge in these issues, along with the other panelists. Maybe just to say a few words quickly about the organisation of this session. We're going to sort of try and do a bit of toing and froing, so hopefully it will work. We're going to be hearing, first of all, from Leonora, who will set the stage with an overview of planning and managing education in crisis settings, before we hear about some of the practical examples that work and reflect on the futures of crisis-sensitive planning. We're going to hopefully have some time for questions, and that is hopefully going to be thanks to the speakers keeping to their time, and I'll try and be a good timekeeper as well. So over to you, Leonora. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and thank you for the moment of reflection too. I think it's extremely humbling to be here, and I'm very honored to be here as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow advocates for a better world that are joining us virtually, we are clearly living in a time where the world is marked by an increasing array of crises and risks, from humanitarian and health crises to armed conflicts, to natural hazards, and those due to climate change. So these challenges place enormous pressure on educational systems, and they pose a significant threat to the right to education for millions of learners around the world. And as we reflect, the challenges are indeed humbling and require our urgent attention today. So we can just stop for a second and reflect on the number, the sheer number that indicates the scope of the issue. Between 2020 and 2023, a staggering 224 million school-aged children were affected by crises and required educational support. So we have to plan today also for the over 1 billion children globally, which is half of the world's children, our children, that reside in countries that are extremely vulnerable to climate change. These are learners, and they are future leaders. So they risk having their futures defined by turmoil and uncertainty. But educational planning and crisis-sensitive educational planning can help mitigate this risk. And as planners, the first thing we need to do is analyze the potential and the real impacts that these risks can have. So, many of you in the room are planners, and if you're not, I'm going to ask you to take out an imaginary hat, put it on, and pretend to be a planner. We're going to do a very mini analysis. And I think we have a Mentimeter question. Oh, I don't know if I'm the one that's going to, voila, that will pop up. So if you have your telephones, you can use the QR code, tap in, and reflecting on your experiences, choose in one word what impact crises can have on education systems today. Hopefully it's working. Our colleagues will come back to it in a minute. We'll let you reflect as we go, and then we'll move ahead just quickly to a brief introduction on, sorry. That's all right. So there's, oh, sorry, there's the Mentimeter. So hopefully everyone can. Oh, right. There's a band. Well, the joys of technology are without number. And hopefully our colleagues online are also able to access the Mentimeter and have probably already typed in quite a few words. So I still see a few colleagues that are trying to capture the QR code, so I'll give it a minute before we go ahead. Great. Most of you, no more cameras. Okay, good. So while you're reflecting on a keyword that describes the impact of crises, let's see if this one works. We go to, yeah, voila. I'm not, no, the next one. Next one. Yeah, please. Keep going. One more, voila. Let's just briefly kind of explain what crisis sensitive planning is, which, as you can see on the slide, it involves identifying and analyzing the risks to education posed by conflict and natural hazards, looking at the two-way relationship between education and risks, understanding how risks impact education systems so that we can minimize the impacts by, for example, I think it was Mr. Segeda yesterday who mentioned putting in place safe schools or ensuring continuity. But also looking at how education systems can maximize the potential of tolerance and conflict sensitivity, and also environmental stewardship. Crisis-sensitive planning also means leaving no one behind, overcoming patterns of inequality that we've heard so much about in the past 2 days, and rising up to meet the challenge of inclusive education. It also means taking climate action to protect our educational institutions and to secure quality education for everyone. In some crisis-sensitive planning, and I think it was the director of planning from Guyana this morning who said, crisis-sensitive planning really aims to support ministries of education to take steps to prevent, to prepare for, and respond to crises, strengthening equitable access to quality education and creating resilient communities. So I think that everyone has had time to type in a word in the Mentimeter. We'll go back up to the Mentimeter screen if we can. I'm not sure if let's see what kind of beautiful word cloud we come up with. So my glasses are good, but not that good. So we do indeed, interesting, devastating is the most frequently used word, but we see quite a few, and it's hard to choose just one word, but we see impacts that are both direct and that are indirect, right? We see impacts that affect access to learning. We see impacts that affect quality. And we also see quite a lot of inequality coming up. So I think I'll stop there because I think His Excellency will have quite a lot to speak about with regards to the Jordanian experience.
Thank you. Regarding challenges Jordan education posed by crisis and risks, Jordan faces a range of natural and human hazards that can have a direct impact on education. These risks include biological, weather, border, cyber risks, as well as food security risks resulting from incidents such as floods and drought. All of these risks are, of course, exacerbated by climate change and can lead to disruption of the educational processes, lower educational attainment, and cause negative psychological and social impact on our students, as was the case during the COVID-19 pandemic, the effect of which is still going, especially in the form of absenteeism from schools. Jordan's education sector has increasingly made progress and adapted to different shocks and crises. For example, the large-scale Syrian crisis has placed significant strains on the public education sector since 2011. And more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased economic pressures on vulnerable households, impacting students' attendance and learning, and exacerbating existing vulnerabilities. Jordan had one of the longest school closures in the world, interrupting face-to-face learning, which results in a learning losses that approach more than 60%. Up to, we had a learning poverty of like 53%. That was aggravated because of COVID-19 to reach about more than 60%. And the Ministry of Education continues to build on past experiences and lessons learned in crisis and risk management, including during COVID-19 and through the Syrian refugee crisis, to further develop strategies and concrete actions to prevent, prepare for, and mitigate the impacts of natural and human-made hazards on children's education in the kingdom. I have the second slide. Now, the state or the government, through the National Center for Security and Crisis Management, oversees monitoring events at local, regional, and international levels, and coordinating between different government entities to prevent and respond to crises and risks. NCCM also provides guidance to line ministries, including the Ministry of Education. Ultimately, the Ministry of Education is in charge of providing education services, even in times of crisis, and we have managed to articulate our commitments to ensure effective delivery of quality education, including during crisis, in key policy documents, including the Education Strategic Plan to 2018-2025, which is in line with Jordan's Vision 2025 and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Minister. I think now we're going to turn back to Leonora.
For a quick overview of our approach. So at IIEP, in preparing for this event, which is an exciting event, we had the opportunity to, can we go back one slide? I don't know if this one's working. We go back to the room. No, I'm gonna, do you want me to do it? No, I can do it. Okay, no, but it's not working. I need to go back to the road. There's the beautiful street map. Yeah, one more, please. Thank you. With the road. This one, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So we had the opportunity to reflect, obviously, on the last 20 years together with the team, and I think we have to first recognize the IIEP's visionary leadership that we've had over the past 20 years. Directors like Goodman Harness, François Caillot, Mr. Bray, Khalil Mashi, Sue Grant-Lewis, of course, and Paul Couster, who really helped support this work. And also colleagues like Margaret Sinclair, Chris Talbot, Lindsay Bird as well, because without them, this work would not have been able to thrive and adapt and evolve to the complexities of the crises that we're dealing with globally. And in looking back over the past 2 decades, we've kind of identified 3 main phases, recognizing, of course, that the work lies across a continuum and builds on practices and adapts to evolving needs, priorities, and challenges. And it really capitalizes and mobilizes all of IIEP's modalities of training, knowledge generation, and technical cooperation. So as you can see on the map there on the road, the first 10 years of our approach and of our work on crisis-sensitive planning were really foundational years, centered on a rights-based approach to education and focused on documenting and analyzing education in emergencies, so the provision of education in emergencies. And the period then was also marked by the development of key guidance. I don't know, many of you might have seen this big notebook back in the day when we were printing things out, huge notebook, it's really heavy, on planning education in emergencies. We also undertook a lot of advocacy with ministries of education, with partners, because at the time, education in emergencies was a humanitarian problem. It was not a development problem. From 2010 onwards, then, we had the opportunity to apply and expand our training and technical cooperation offer to support ministries integrate risk reduction measures into sector planning processes. And we positioned CSP's work, IIEP's work on crisis-sensitive planning at the heart of the humanitarian and development nexus. Then the last 3 years since 2020, I don't need to explain why, but we have been able to accelerate IIEP's work to institutionalize crisis-sensitive planning across our offer and within ministries of education, as we work with them to strengthen capacities really to implement risk reduction strategies in the education sector. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see a quick glimpse of the different program areas where we're engaged today. Developing crisis and risk management analyses and strategies, and we'll hear from the minister in just a minute about the example in Jordan, either as standalone policies or as an integral part of education sector plans. We're also working on supporting ministries to use humanitarian and climate-related data for planning education, and this we've been working on in quite a few countries recently, including Burkina Faso. We are also working importantly on planning for the inclusion of refugees in national education systems, really to enhance equity and to reach the most marginalized. In line with that area of work, we have been analyzing and studying teacher management in refugee settings, looking at how teachers are managed from the recruitment process to deployment, but also looking at professional development and work conditions. And then our last two areas, one is around climate change adaptation and environmental sustainability, which really has to be done in partnership with ministries of environment and with ministries of natural resources. And of course, in partnership with others like GPE, Save the Children as well. And then finally, we're working on also analyzing Ministry of Education leadership in crises as they work to ensure that alignment between their vision and their standards and norms with those of humanitarian actors in many situations. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonor. Minister, did you want to come in with your example?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Ministry of Education prepared its crisis and risk management strategy for the years 2023 and 2027. And the crisis risk management strategy aims to ensure that the Ministry of Education can guarantee a safe and secure educational environment and continuity of quality education in the face of different risks and hazards facing Jordan. And the strategy focuses on addressing the risks posed to education in Jordan by identifying key system-wide strategic actions to ensure that education actors, including schools and students, can develop a localized and decentralized approach to crisis and risk management. The process of developing the crisis and risk management strategy has been very important as it helped raise awareness on crisis and risk management and build internal capacities. It has also been an important opportunity to reflect on the gaps, lessons learned, and challenges, and collectively identifying solutions. Now, the Ministry of Education has a strategy to implement these. First, the Ministry of Education restructures its planning directorate to include a risk management section, a decisive step which demonstrates the Ministry of Education's dedication to strengthening the policy environment and capacity at both central and field directorate levels. Second, the Ministry of Education is currently working on developing an operational plan and communication plan for crisis and risk management, in addition to developing guidelines for the Directorate of Education and how to deal with risks. The operational plan outlines the roles and responsibilities per activity, in addition to the expected financial costs. The communication strategy will determine the channels and materials that can be used to reach different target groups for comprehensive awareness of crisis and risk management, and to coordinate with education partners so that they can provide support and resources within the broad network of key stakeholders. Third, Ministry of Education is developing a framework for monitoring and evaluating the strategy to be able to track progress and identify obstacles to implementation. Thanks to UNESCO and its International Institute for Educational Planning, who are supporting the Ministry of Education through the System Strengthening Partnership Program under a multi-partner trust fund with Canada, Italy, Norway, and Switzerland. This is an important because the Ministry of Education needs flexible and responsive partnership to support its work.
Thank you, Minister, for that important example. Just to say, we're having some crisis and risk management with the PowerPoint, so please excuse the fact we're not fully synced, but we can now go on to the education cannot wait slide, which you've had some preview of. So over to you, Christian.
Thanks a lot. That's the right one. So glad to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting ECW to say a few words in this panel. It's interesting to hear the discussions as the focus of IEP is really on supporting governments in crisis sensitive planning. But in a way, if you reflect on ECW's creation in 2016 at the World Humanitarian Summit, it filled actually a global gap, a global preparedness gap of the system in terms of raising the voice for crisis affected children and their education needs, in terms of mobilizing much needed resources to respond to education in emergencies, and basically deliver sort of financing options and programming partnership that quickly can deploy funds to sudden onset crisis and also support protracted crisis. So in a way, it's a global crisis sensitive planning tool, if you wish, or a partner. Here on this visual, you see our new strategic plan, which focuses more on what are actually our core contributions. So you see at the bottom the core functions of ECW, which I just listed, which fill this global gap. And what is important is that there are two kind of systemic gaps that at the country level and global level we want to solve. And one is more and better financing for crisis affected children and to fulfill their education needs. And also better and stronger systems and capacities at country level and global level to have the foundations set in place so when crises happen, that there's quick response out there, and also in those responses that there's resilience building embedded in those programs. And of course, like at the end, we share basically the usual like final outcomes that we want to all achieve is better increased participation and continuity in education and increased learning outcomes and well-being for those crisis affected children. Next slide, please. That's great. This shows basically we have to fill that global gap. We have tailored our investment modalities. So what you see here is for escalating sudden onset crisis, we have what we call a first emergency response window that really is to within days basically create concept notes, quick concept notes being prepared to respond very quickly, and within basically the first 4 to 8 weeks and disperse funds for partners to respond to an emergency that has happened. Those programs usually focus on community level interventions, and they're geared towards partners, agencies, so not governments. Protracted crisis, these are the multi-year programs that look at similarly a response to a crisis, a protracted crisis, but they also embed resilience building entry points. So they look at education coordination structures, policies, sector management, and those aspects that we consider often upstream. So they try to look at that resilience building. And then finally, we have an acceleration funding window, which tries to capture the lessons learned and have a global partners supporting those processes to really understand what works and what doesn't in those settings. So when you look at where does crisis sensitive planning at country level lie, that would be mostly through the multi-year resilience windows or through the acceleration funding modality that you have at the bottom, less through the FER, what we call the first emergency response window. Can we go to the next slide? So here you see basically how we program. Now the programs and the funds go to partners. So they execute those programs. in and to support governments. So the funds don't go directly to governments. Maybe that's quite a difference, I would say, then in terms of system strengthening and other solutions that, for example, the Global Partnership for Education would have, where the funds really are more embedded in the education sector diagnostic processes, the education sector planning processes. Sort of we align with those tools, but we focus really on a particular crisis and try to, from there, provide lessons learned and feed into those broader processes. So it's a different entry point. But what you see here is very much aligned here. We recently became a member of the GADRES, the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in the Education Sector. And it's around preparedness. So the IEP recently issued a policy brief on preparedness, MOE leadership. So that very much resonates and creates interesting entry points, I think, where we can collaborate also in the future. But it's around preparedness at country level, engaging communities downstream and finding entry points to capture those. And last, for this intervention, I would also highlight sort of, for example, one example in South Sudan as a concrete example where we worked with IEP also involvement. We provided an acceleration funding grant to UNESCO to strengthen the institutionalization of EIE data into the EMIS systems. So to institutionalize those data processes. So there are partners who come from it from a development perspective and to strengthen those sector processes. And we come from it more from a humanitarian perspective. And those discussions are really interesting and fruitful to see these because we approach things quite differently in that sense. And I was talking to some IEP colleagues, what's the institutional setup for such crisis responses? And it's tricky because there are so many different actors. You have a humanitarian actors coordination platform, refugee coordination, development coordination, the government planning processes. And all these really provide basically create a risk of fragmentation. So one big kind of challenge that we face is how do we actually ensure there's coherence across all partners in those responses? So we see that as a big emerging topic that we want to address through our programs.
Thank you very much. I think we'll continue on with the panel discussion and then come to the questions at the end. And I think it's good for those of us that aren't planners to hear importantly from what's happening at the country level and the real experience at the country level. So back to you, Minister, for your next intervention.
Fostering a high level of alignment, coordination and information sharing within and between relevant ministries, educational partners and private sector actions is critical. And luckily, Jordan already has a favorable environment to foster such dialogue. And greater investments and partnerships are needed to strengthen national policy strategies and plans to ensure that the Ministry of Education is able to deliver on its commitments under the crisis and risk management strategy. For example, in the collection and use of disaggregated data, both to better understand disproportionate disaster impacts and exposure and to inform resilience building plans. And Jordan must continue to prioritize commitments to achieving the Sunday framework of SDGs, especially the reduction of poverty and inequality, while addressing disaster risk and vulnerability with a focus on the most vulnerable communities. And finally, we must also ensure that the most at risk, including women, other older persons, and persons with disabilities, are meaningfully included. We are committed to addressing the reciprocal relationship between disasters and inequality within the context of education.
Thank you so much. I think that's very important focus on that interaction between crisis and inequality, which sadly go hand in hand. So, Leonora.
Yeah, so just a few reflections on the work. I mean, I think that have emerged in thinking through the last 20 years. and I think this has come out quite clearly throughout the last 2 days. Educational planning and crisis-sensitive educational planning require constant evolution, and ministries need to be able to adapt to these unpredictable events, which often have unforeseeable scale and impact. So in order to do that, it's important for ministries to have access to new knowledge, work with new partners, as we heard the minister say, and to put in place innovative ways of working and lead education stakeholders, the LEG, the Refugee Coordination Group, the Humanitarian Cluster, lead those stakeholders through challenging times. And really at the crux of our work is supporting ministry leadership to be adaptive and to be resilient through our work at IIEP. Another lesson learned is around our modalities and the fact that they are mutually reinforcing. I think we are very lucky at IIEP to occupy quite a unique space in terms of the technical expertise that we have and our ability to kind of leverage the different complementary modalities. In a way, we're a unique kind of laboratory of ideas that allow us to inform practices and policy dialogue at the global level, but also at country level. So in the future, and I think His Excellency alluded to some of the points that we will also be working on, and including hopefully in Jordan, I think we've seen the global learning crisis that highlights the importance of understanding what and how learners are learning, including socio-emotional learning and psychosocial skills. So we need to plan to reinforce and assess these skills to ensure that tomorrow's leaders are they themselves resilient. We also need to address the impacts of climate change, and we have a very good opportunity with the GPE, with Save the Children and UNESCO, to plan for today climate smart school communities and climate smart education systems in order to protect the earth for tomorrow's leaders. And then finally, we need to address and delve more deeply into understanding, as you rightly mentioned, the double disadvantages or the intersectionalities of different social vulnerabilities. Learners that are affected by crises are impounded often or most infected by education disparities. So we have to plan to reach those most marginalized so that the young learners in crisis-affected settings can become tomorrow's leaders.
Thank you, Leonora. And Christian, back to you.
Yes.
I think we're fully synced now.
Wow, it's working.
It is.
Adaptation.
Flexibility.
So this is just showing, I want to share two initiatives for the way forward that we are currently heavily engaged in and preparing the work for. And one is related to this comment that I raised before, that there's the challenge of fragmentation with the multiple actors and coordination mechanisms that are in place to respond to crisis. And I think this is very important for MOEs to get a clear handle and lead on. There's a lot of potential in all these partnerships, but there's also a high risk of fragmentation. And the policy brief on preparedness, MOE leadership on the rapid response mechanism has this enabling environment section there. And there's clearly like coordination and engagement is listed there, and apart from data and evidence systems and so on. So that side is really key for us. How can we actually develop solutions where partners really align their efforts, build upon their comparative advantages to identify really these collective joint outcomes that they can achieve together? And I've listed here on this slide, basically on the left, the diversity of actors and mechanisms that often coexist in countries that we need to work towards a more coherent approach. So these mechanisms will continue to exist, but how can we actually bring them together? And there are 5 areas that we identified where we would like to see coherence focused. And one is like on the coordination practices themselves, on the data and evidence, the joint up programming approaches, but also the financing. And with financing, it would be like you have multiple funders some with very short-term kind of focus, some with more longer-term focus. So how can we build sort of a tailored system of financing, for example? And of course, there ECW plays a central role in getting this together. And then finally, from this coherence, what kind of coherence is necessary to bring about the best quality programs for crisis-affected children in terms of coherence, ensuring that there's coverage of all children in need, synergies taken from the different programs, there's no kind of fragmentation and so forth, and finally, better outcomes for children. Last slide, and yes, depends on how quick we can change the slide. The other focus, of course, many different partners now globally focus on that aspect, is climate change and the integration of climate related risks in their approaches. So maybe you can list sort of ECW as a co-partner on climate smart programming, because we want to see how we can incorporate that in our designs, for example, in our longer term multi-year resilience programs. Then anticipatory action, preparedness, sort of how can we embed this in our suite of investment modalities? How can we collaborate with all these different partners, achieve better coherence, but also how can we tap into the financing, the climate financing institutions that are often not within the education sector, but how can the education sector leverage those funding opportunities? And finally, how can we support better global learning on climate change through our programs?
Thank you very much. I think we've heard a lot through those presentations. Minister, before I come back to you for the final word on the lessons learned, we'll open it up to some questions. We have about 15 minutes, I think, so happy to hear both if there's any online. See if this is working this time. Is this working? No. We haven't got any online. That's yours, is it? I'm taking yours. Really getting wrong with technology now. Thankfully, that wasn't your one. So you'll let me know if there's any online, but there aren't at the moment. So here's your opportunity to ask some questions. I think really it's such an important topic. And while we're waiting for people to think, I just like to bring the question back to the people again. So we've heard, I mean, I think what we've been hearing is really important technical work, which you're all experts in. But Christian, maybe you could sort of just let us know, for example, with Education Cannot Wait, how many people has Education Cannot Wait reached? We know before Education Cannot Wait was in existence, only a very minuscule amount of humanitarian aid, less than 2% of humanitarian aid went to education. So really, those children living in crisis and conflict situations were not being reached. So I don't know if you've got some knowledge about how the existence of Education Cannot Wait has helped to change that picture and what more we need to do.
Thank you for that question. I think there's a gap in the global statistical system to highlight the needs of crisis-affected children. So you had like initially a research commission that showed 75 million children were crisis affected. That's where Education Cannot Wait started. And it was a methodology that used different research that was available and consolidated this. Then the number that Leonora referred to, the 224 million, is a recent study that we commissioned from ECW, which is much higher. But it's really, it took a longer process to establish a more standardized methodology that we can agree upon. This is how we count crisis-affected children. So first, a global setup that really has an agreed kind of approach to measuring how many are in need of education. Because if a child lives in a crisis-affected country where there's a crisis maybe in a different area of the country, but that child doesn't reach the foundational learning outcomes that are needed, well, it's a learning crisis, but it's not a crisis-affected child. So there are these important nuances that become important. And we try to raise the voice, basically, of those children in the statistical system. Then similarly now on the reach is the question, how do we measure reach? Is it just like a learning material provided? That doesn't guarantee learning outcomes. So how can we actually measure out of school rates of crisis affected children, changes thereof, and also learning outcomes? So we try to also introduce this in our kind of monitoring, and coupled with sort of more an agreed reach kind of estimation. So there are a lot of steps, I think, that are still needed for us to say, for example, how many of these crisis affected children are we reaching? But what we have done so far is since inception, like up to 9 million children reached. Now that is a very small amount by ECW compared to the 224 million. What we then advocate is all the funding together to mobilize more funding to reach those 224. And that's this whole resource mobilization effort and the measurement and the reporting on reach from these other partners. So it's a longer answer maybe to your question, but there's a lot of challenges.
No, very helpful one. And I think this issue on sort of data and measurement have come up a lot over the last 2 days in relation to planning. And probably here more than ever, we need good numbers, but also remembering that children aren't only statistics, as you rightly said. So now we've warmed up the audience here to come up with your questions. Any online ones? Still no? There's about 300 people online. I'm sure you've got some good burning questions there. I can definitely ask lots of questions, but I think there's probably more interesting and important ones in the room here. Not for the moment.
We're between them and coffee.
Ah, have we got one? Thank you. Excellent.
Hi, very interesting presentations. I'm just jumping in, maybe also to make a linkage with some of the earlier sessions that we had. I think here with crisis affected children, we have quite a number of interesting intersectionalities. So what about girls in crisis affected contexts? Do you make any specific effort for those if they tend to be discriminated? Or children affected by severe poverty? I mean, how do you take into account the differential needs of children that are crisis affected? So I'm sure that you have an answer to that.
Thank you. It's definitely ones that more colleagues have mentioned, but good to get maybe some concrete examples from you. Or while you're thinking of the answers, I'll leave you all to be ready for your next question. So maybe if we just go, Leonora, would you like to start? And Minister, if you want to come in.
I think one of the beautiful things also about IIEP is that we do have the colleagues from the Gender at the Center initiative. And I think that that's something that in the coming years, we need to work more closely with them. But I do think that, you know, through the risk analyses that we do, disaggregating data by gender, by socioeconomics status is one way of working towards contributing to the most marginalized within the crisis affected populations. And then of course, identifying with local populations, whether it's indigenous populations, whether it's refugee populations themselves, identifying measures that will, you know, bring children back to school as the case may be, or may keep them in school, will help girls, you know, attain learning outcomes so that they can move on to secondary education. But really working on finding solutions with, and we've heard this also through the last couple of days, so I'm just repeating what everyone else has said, but finding solutions with local populations and affected populations themselves is really essential.
Yeah, funding is a very important, a major problem of education worldwide. According to Jeffrey Sachs yesterday in the UNESCO meeting, he mentioned that total expenditure on education is 0.1%. 0.1% all over the world, which is much below the 4 to 6% of the GDP or 15 to 20% of national budget. And that's the major issue. And that's responsible for, I mean, the loss of education in millions of places. So financing of education is a major problem that we should work, as education is an investment and future. And without proper and enough funding, we'll face problems. We'll continue to face problems.
Yeah, really important point. We can have wonderful plans and we can have agendas to reach the most marginalized, but if we don't have the money, we're not going to get very far.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, crisis will impact children, girls, boys very differently. So there are a lot of differences in that impact. So we incorporate a gender analysis first to see basically the different impacts, the needs, and then we tailor the programs towards that. That includes also gender capacity analysis of actors who are in place. I mentioned the different partnerships, and we introduced an innovation around that where we call upon a gender lead organization that partners at country level identify which organization is best placed to offer expertise and play a lead role in advocacy around that. And that is really helped basically put at the forefront kind of the concerns of girls. Now, how much in those responses in humanitarian crisis and protracted crisis do you focus on some more of the underlying root causes of deprivation that may not be linked to the crisis? That is a difficult choice then each time, but we try through our multi-year resilience programs to look at some of those root causes, and therefore we work towards gender norms in communities, how those can be really the crisis response can be basically promoting changes on that front too.
Thank you. I think we've warmed up our online audience, so there's a couple of questions now online.
All right. We have a question from Jordan Naidu, who's a well-known friend of IIP's. Despite the progress, 1% the coordination response more broad. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Despite the progress, one persistent challenge is the coordination among multiple actors in emergency response in education, and more broadly, increased human and financial cost exacerbated by duplicate actions. What can be done? And we have another question from Sally Johnson. Living in a small island nation that is experiencing the impact of climate change, what support in terms of resources can you provide for assisting teachers and educators to understand more about this concept and its impact?
I'll take this will be the final round of questions. So we've got a gentleman here, and if you've got one last burning one, then we'll add somebody else. I can see a hand waving behind as well. So we'll take those two questions together.
Merci, Madame la Modératrice. Thank you so much. I am directly, I would like to talk about the challenge that was raised. And I heard the question, it's pretty much the same. If coordination is a challenge because there are so many stakeholders, then there are two things I would like to mention. We spoke about modalities. NGOs have specific areas of intervention, and all NGOs, in fact, are all in the same region. So you have NGOs which are overcrowded by NGOs, and other zones are basically left out. So you really have to think about the efficiency. Now, in light of your experience, coordination is a challenge. So I would like to know, do you have examples, success stories in terms of coordinating response amongst various stakeholders during a crisis?
Thank you. So two related questions on coordination. And the final question.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, for this panel discussion. I would like to talk about intersectionality, which was just raised, and intersectionality and girls. Now, I would like to know, how is this organized? How do you make sure that children who are disabled are factored in a humanitarian response during the crisis?
Important question. I think this issue around intersectionality is clearly a really vital one. So I think if it's okay, we'll go in reverse order. So we'll have Christian, then we'll have Leonora, and then we'll come back to you, Minister, and then also have your closing remarks at the end.
Thank you to Jordan Naidu, I think, in the online forum. Yes, indeed, there is as I mentioned, the challenge of fragmentation of different coordination mechanisms. And that is why we set that as our priority for this strategic plan, to work towards more coherent processes. I think it's worth a read, in my view, that we've funded and commissioned a study under the Global Partner Project that was led by ODI. And Susan Nicolai was the research lead. And that looked at different settings. I think there was 5 or 6 different cases of where there was an analysis of the coherence issues in those responses. But it also highlighted some success cases where basically better coordination ensured there was, for example, no difference in pay of teacher salaries, which led to like fluctuations from one region to another, for example. So simple things like that, or like joint learning. We provide in our multi-year resilience programs often grants to multiple grantees under a program. So that change actually, which was made 2 years ago, it required a lot of stages and guidance from our side just to get grantees under a common program to jointly report, for example. Initially, you would have each agency reports what they have done, but no joint reporting. So moving just towards that, we hope to promote already through our programming better coherence. And then what the colleague, I think from Burkina Faso, where we also have a multi-year resilience program, and it's a very strong partner around learning assessments actually there, and a lot of great work being done. That challenge of actually having areas where there are a lot of NGOs in one area, but then some other areas where there are no NGOs, this is a critical issue actually in solving the coverage. And we are aiming to, through our localization approach, to build capacities of smaller NGOs to be able to reach more areas that are affected by a crisis, so that we have fewer and fewer gaps. But it's a slow process because some of these smaller NGOs lack basically that participation and representation in these coordination fora. So it's a work in progress.
Sorry, great, thank you. So with regards to the issues related to coordination, I think from IIEP's position, we work on that angle at the global level, but also at the country level. At the global level, we work through the Global Education Cluster primarily in order to really advocate for ministries of education to be leading clusters when they're activated in emergency humanitarian crises. And that has been work that has been ongoing for quite some time. And, you know, it's quite interesting to see how that has evolved, because at the global level, quite often for the Global Education Cluster, we would have annual meetings, and it would be primarily humanitarian actors that were represented and were discussing some of the challenges. But most recently, I think it was in Nairobi in June, there were quite a significant number of Ministry of Education representatives there, which is quite an accomplishment insofar as they're able to then express kind of their important needs directly to colleagues that are working on coordination in humanitarian settings. And then at the country level, one of the things, as we are leading education sector plan development processes with ministries of education, we try to also encourage the education cluster, if it exists, or humanitarian actors, and often CSOs, as Mr. Segeda mentioned, to be represented through those processes. So bringing clusters and humanitarian actors, and including now also environment actors, to the table when education policy decisions are being made. For the colleague from a small island developing state, the question around climate change and supporting teachers and educators, the work that we're doing is in close collaboration with UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development section. And they have recently launched the Greening Education Partnership, which is working to develop a kind of model green school, which we'll be piloting together with them and with Save the Children, hopefully in Malawi, through the Climate Smart Resilient or Climate Smart Education Systems program that we have. So watch this space, and that's one way of looking at the whole school and what it means for a school community to be green in terms of infrastructure, in terms of content, and in terms of the way that it's run in terms of its management. And then the very important question from Ernestine about learners with disabilities. I think that's an area that IIEP is working to invest in. And it's something that's extremely important and very challenging in regards to the limited data and data that really paints a clear picture of who are the learners with disabilities and what are their specific challenges. So I think that's something that in terms of the intersectionality work that we'll be taking forward, we need to continue working on and delve deeper into.
Thank you, Leonora. So Minister, I'll hand back to you both for any final reflections on the questions and your closing comments. Thank you.
It's regarding coordination between stakeholders, especially in the field, and to address the importance of coordination. Just an example from Jordan, we had the national diagnosis assessment made by UNICEF and by USAID, addressing the same grades in school. And the UNICEF study involved more than 800,000 students. The USAID has sort of sample of 30,000 students, and they came up with a very different strategy to address this issue. And we have to struggle with a plan, to have a national plan to implement. UNICEF wants us to stop our curriculum and address the learning losses only, which is a catastrophe by all means. And we have agreed with experts to draft a plan for the remediation over a three-year period, and it's running very well. So the coordination in that aspect, and we have many other examples where lack of coordination could make you run into real problems, even at the level of maintenance of school or anything like this. Now, regarding the lessons learned from our experience with the crisis management, it's important that we mainstream and create a culture of crisis and risk management for prevention, preparedness, and responsiveness in the education sector. Investing in longer-term system and capacity strengthening will enable national institutions and education stakeholders to properly plan, implement, and monitor the needed strategies and actions to ensure continuity of learning. And processes are also important. Setting up effective, sustainable, and inclusive processes from the beginning in close collaboration with relevant stakeholders is essential to allow for in-depth and meaningful system responsiveness. Focusing on decentralization throughout the processes is also critical to reach schools, teachers, and students. And a lesson from this meeting, it's sort of reassuring, because I thought Jordan has peculiar, unique problems, but I found the same problems that were addressed in the previous session as well as in this session.
Thank you so much, Minister, and panelists and audience. I think that last point is so vital, that there's so much to learn from each other, and learning the lessons within and across countries is so important. And I think this is also something that IIEP is very well placed to support. Just one final reflection from me on some of these discussions is that the word crisis sort of somehow gives the idea that it's short term and something's going to end. But with conflict and the issues around climate, very sadly, they're ongoing, and we don't often see a foreseeable end to them. So I think these issues that have been said in sort of, again, quite technical terms of humanitarian versus development, those debates that we had 20 years ago and sadly still having, are so important to address, because humanitarian support is short term. It's needed for those that are really in the midst of some of these real crisis situations. But sadly, we're not necessarily going to see the end to it in the near future. So we do need to think longer term alongside those short term delivery options as well. And so just want to thank all of those who are working in these very difficult circumstances, the governments, the civil society organisations, along with IIEP and other partners. Ministry in Jordan, I know that you have a number of different challenges that you've been talking about, and so grateful that there is this support that's hopefully helping the next generation of our children for the future. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much to Pauline and to the whole panel for this very interesting and critical discussion. We will now take another short coffee break, coming back at 4:15. We are almost at the end of the 2 days, which is sad, but you've barely caught me at all talking about my own work. So let me just take a moment to ask you to have a look at the publications outside the auditorium. Take as many as you want and let me know how you find them. There is also, this might be your last chance to use the photo corner upstairs, and please take photos, share them on social media using the hashtag IIEP 60 years. That would be wonderful to see. Yep, see you back at 4:15 after the most annoying thing, the bell. Yeah.
So I just forgot one thing. There is a podcast that's available that I forgot to mention, but please do look out for it. It has the minister, it has a director, and it has also the head of education cannot wait. So I think it's well worth watching. Please do look out for it. We'll make sure it's shared.
Thank you very much, everybody. So it has been a wonderful experience to listen to the perspectives and themes shared across these 2 days. Allow me to just quickly remind you of our online guest book, which we would be really happy if you could sign to let us know what the 60th anniversary means to you. You can access it via the QR code on your badge or via the link in the chat. We now have our final panel session on thematic priority 6, developing skills for the future and the transition to work. How can planning help? As moderator for this panel, we are thrilled to welcome Mr. Damien Black, Commissioner and Chief Executive Officer of the Tertiary Education Commission in Jamaica. In addition to this role, Mr. Black is President of the Governing Board of UNESCO's Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Damien.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to acknowledge the privilege that I feel having been asked to moderate this session. I certainly want to acknowledge the fact that I regret that I only came late this morning, because the material as covered certainly has seemed to be quite valuable. But I commend the work of IIEP and certainly its 60 years of existence and the work that it has been doing to assist educational development globally. We are at the end, and it is worth to note that they have saved the best for last. And I certainly, you are agreed with that, correct? Thank you. Michaela certainly is fascinated by the fact that she finally gets to speak about something in relation to post-secondary education. The topic for this panel, how can planning adapt, or the issues that were related, how can planning adapt, adjust to changes in both post-secondary education, but also in the light of a rapidly changing volatile and globalized labor market? So developing skills for the future. What are the lessons that we have learned? And certainly, what is it that can come out of this discussion that would aid systems globally? Jamaica, where I reside and work, we have had over a number of years, data that shows the critical challenges that we face with respect to our workforce. About 60% of individuals, data that our Statistical Institute and the Planning Institute of Jamaica, when they compile, indicate that 60%, almost 900,000 persons within the prime working age population, 24 to 54, are without qualifications. And I'm not here speaking about tertiary education qualifications. I'm speaking about no qualifications at all. This obviously has significant impact with respect to productivity, underemployment, your capacity, ability to earn, to progress. And certainly what is central to this discussion, the whole matter of flexible learning pathways emerges. And so we are approaching this issue with some haste in terms of addressing the issues associated with workforce development. Jamaica participated in research executed and led by the IIEP concerning flexible learning pathways. We want to see and ensure that we are able to implement as best as possible and to insist that the system moves away from its formal, inflexible approaches to how it is that we assess learning and the willingness with which we are able to accept other persons who can demonstrate their learning, can demonstrate their competence, but only need the framework both legal and regulatory, and then at the institutional level, the mechanisms to appropriately assess and certify learning. So this conversation this afternoon will seek to address these issues, and then certainly we look forward to the engagement with you that will follow. So we're gonna begin with Michaela, and she will be speaking to lessons from research that she has led and that she has led in collaboration with other colleagues here at the IIEP concerning skills in the post-secondary sector, and certainly how, if at all, it has impacted or will impact IIEP's approach to learning. Let's welcome Michaela.
Okay. So good afternoon and good evening for some of you, for our online community. I have a definite pleasure, and I think also a challenge to reflect in 10 minutes over 60 years of research and training for skills development through post-secondary education. So let me also mention that I have been personally involved in 30 of the 60 years. So it's quite a long time. So very shortly, the objectives of this presentation are to provide an overview of IEP's work on post-secondary education, reflect on underlying rationales and questions and how these have changed over time, and reflect on the linkage of IEP's work and how it has impacted planning for post-secondary education. So what I want to say upfront is that IEP has always worked on post-secondary education since its inception in 1963, often as a continuum through sector-wide approaches, where we have included also a program on higher education, but also with specific programs, specific projects on post-secondary education. And that employability has been always at the center of these initiatives. So I think that is really one of the strong points. So the education employment linkage was always a concern throughout all our different projects. And we have always had a strong linkage between research and training. So most of our research projects actually have culminated in the development of a training program, which then has allowed us actually to disseminate the findings to the community of policymakers and planning. So here on the right-hand side, I don't go through them now, but I will go through them one by one. I will talk shortly about these different projects. Can you hold the slide? So we had a very first and very timely project in 1966, and it lasted until 1974. So when human resource development was at the heart of newly independent countries and favoring the creation of new universities. Many newly independent countries wanted to have their own university. And so IEP set up a project, a multi-year project, that focused on the planning of the development of universities, and from the beginning looked into the employment perspective as well. So this project created practical knowledge and guidelines on how to plan for university development, taking into account the labor market dimension. And then in the late 70s, when higher education systems were expanding already, and in many countries they were facing a growing number of graduates that were unemployed, and that actually pushed the concern of education and training even further. So IEP conducted research on the dynamics of the higher education employment relationship in 21 countries, and that led to the creation of an international knowledge base on the relationship of higher education and employment, and an enhanced methodology on how to assess it. So if you are acquainted with the history of planning, in the 70s, we were favoring very much the manpower planning approach, but IEP at this point in time already in the late 70s was using tracer studies actually to support also the findings on what type of skills were needed for the future. Next. And then in the 90s, and so since the mid-80s, we were faced with neoliberal approach to the public sector management. And so this was not the time where more public funding could be used. And there was a concentration actually on in the concern on how to use existing resources better. So IIEP then in the early 90s set up a project on institutional management in higher education, emphasizing improved usage of finance, staff, and infrastructure. But what this particular research actually helped to support as an idea for planning is that in the higher education sector, in the post-secondary education sector, where institutions have a relatively high level of autonomy, the focus has to be on planning at the institutional level. And what this project also emphasized was that it is very important to have a strong linkage between planning and management capacity. So I think some major ideas coming from this project also for planning. Then we have the next one. And then by mid-2000, that was again within we were in a context of a major resource constraint. Many countries were favoring the setting of a private higher education at the post-secondary level. So quality assurance was really seen as the solution to the quality problem. And of course, in some way it was, but in some other contexts, it was not the solution, but at least a partial solution. So in a way, the development of quality assurance mechanisms, both at the national and in the institutional level, became a priority of the sector. And so IIEP conducted research on both internal and external quality assurance to support countries in higher education in the development of their QA systems. And I think here something that is really important for planning, and I think maybe something that we have not. IIEP Dakar is training actors both within the public sector, but also outside in the private sector to contribute jointly to the implementation of TVET policy. And next. Yeah, and that's the last before project, Flexible Learning Pathways. Damien, you were speaking to Jamaica's contribution. So again, within the context of expanding post-secondary systems, we are faced actually with a more diverse student population with diversified needs. So we need to design education systems which are flexible, which are able to respond flexibly to diverse student needs. And at the same point in time, we have a recognition that there's not only formal learning, there is also informal and non-formal learning, and we have to recognize this. We have to create linkages between the learning taking place outside the formal education system and the informal education system. So IIEP conducted a research on flexible learning pathways in 8 countries. We had also an international survey looking at diverse admission, facilitated progression, and preparation for the labor market. And this, in terms of planning, this research actually helps to shift the focus to planning for a diverse provision. Actually, oh, sorry. Yeah, I have to speak more to this microphone. When I'm getting excited, then tend to forget. So we have to really to plan for actually post-secondary ecosystems rather than only the public sector. So, and now this is the current research that we are working on a pilot basis. So micro-credential frameworks came out as actually one of the more recent and top ranking priorities in countries actually to flexibilize high post-secondary education sector. So we are currently conducting a pilot research with Mauritius, with the Mauritius Qualifications Authority and the Higher Education Commission, to set actually the foundation for the development of a micro-credential framework. Now, I want to come to my last slide. I have 1 minute. I'm between stop and 1 minute. So what I want to say here is that over this process, I think we have been able to construct a more complex approach to planning in the post-secondary sector. One, more complex in terms of data sources that we are using, both macro level and micro level data, with strong emphasis on employability issues and supported with data from quality assurance. In terms of skills development, flexible learning pathways have moved the focus to planning from provision, so provision of student places, to skills development. So how can we plan for skills development? I think this is really a major shift in the focus of planning. And then last not least, I think it's this really, and it has been said already, a greater emphasis on multi-level planning. Yesterday we used the term ubiquitous planning. I will call it multi-level planning, still to be conceived as a coordinated process, I would argue for, but definitely involving a very strong planning locus at the level of institutions. So I want to stop here. And have I been on time?
Thank you. Thank you, Michaela. So Dr. Michaela Martin, IIEP Program Specialist for Higher Education Policy and Governance. Certainly we note the research driving to the fore matters concerning employability, significant in the diversity of the student population within Jamaica, across the Caribbean. We certainly see that the numbers of persons that traditionally would form the cohort to access university is actually declining. So that is a critical issue. So we now want to invite Dr. Sirat Morshidi, former Director General of Higher Education in Malaysia, to speak to recent developments in Malaysia with respect to skills planning and development.
Good evening again. Let me say a few words on what we have in Malaysia in terms of education planning, specifically for in the context of micro-credentials, and skills for skills and qualification. Are we here? Oh, right. Let me start with this. Now, Malaysia is a middle-income country, which is caught in a middle-income trap, as we know in economics. So we are moving from the transition from industry-led skill formation and TVET from the previous aggregation system. And now we're talking in terms of upper middle-income Malaysia, moving from the government-led initiative to a government to become facilitator with employers leading many of the activities together with other partners. This is the theme that we have adopted from ILO recently with respect to skill for prosperity. Now, if we look at this, we're looking at in terms of from no leaders to government-led, and then now we're in a phase where it is industry-led with social partnership. This is a contentious area right now that we're having. I'll talk about that later. Now, we have heard about a large proportion of people from many developing countries who are not skilled, who have not proper formal qualification. In the case of Malaysia, we, in order to move from the middle income trap kind of thing, we need skilled people, we need skilled workforce. So in order to deal with the problems, we have introduced APEL, which is a accreditation of prior experiential learning. From 2016 onward, we have introduced APEL-A, which encourage people with no qualification, no academic qualification, no formal qualification in that sense, to enter higher education institution based on their experiential learning. That was in 2016. In 28, there's APEL Access. APEL Access with credit award we introduced in 2016. And then in 2021, we introduced APEL,
which is based on award, academic award, and qualification. And now we are moving into FLM, which is micro-credential. So in other words, we are using FL in order to encourage people to enter into higher education, even though they have no formal qualification as such. That relates to what Michaela has said earlier on, flexible learning or flexible access to higher education in that sense. Yeah. So that is the journey that we have right now in Malaysia in order to increase the number of people with skills and expertise in that sense. Yeah. Even though you don't have a formal qualification. Well, now we are using micro-credential at the moment in order to improve the skill level of Malaysian so that they can be absorbed into the labor force easily. Now, micro-credential here, we refers to digital certifications, assess knowledge, skill, and competencies in a specific area or field from accredited programs or standalone, and it relates to professional, technical, and academic personnel in that sense. So that's the guideline to good practices of micro-credential in Malaysia. So, so through micro-credential, we can shorten the production of the required human resource in Malaysia. Now, let me, am I moving? Yes. Now, micro-credential in Malaysia supports the Higher Education Trust, Trust 9 in the Malaysian Education Development Plan for 2015-25. Yeah. So in chapter 10 of that plan, it talks about developing future talents through academic, formal, and non-academic, non-formal kind of pathways. Yeah, that is what micro-credential relates to in the Malaysian higher education system. Next, please. Why micro-credential in our system? Because we have specialized knowledge and skill to empower students through that flexible pathways. We have flexibility and accessibility through online courses or modules rather than just face-to-face micro-credentials. It provides career advancement for people in industries, working mothers, adult learners to update their skill or to improve their qualifications through a non-formal or alternative pathways. It addresses skill gaps that we have experienced in Malaysia at the moment in order to move away from the middle income trap. And then basically it relates to lifelong learning in the case of stand-alone micro-credentials. Yeah. Now, we have roughly now in one university alone, we have 280 micro-credential courses offered. And there are more than 551,000 enrollment in these micro-credential courses alone. So that's one university. And we have 20 public universities and 400 private universities in Malaysia that are moving into micro-credentials because that will improve the level of course quality in the country as a whole. Yes. So if you look at micro-credentials, why the take-up from the private sector is so popular in that sense, because there are some income generation aspect of the whole thing. You offer micro-credentials, you have income generating potential from the whole thing. So it's very popular than the normal long-term 4-year course that we're offering at the moment. What are the critical success factors in one university that we have? We have the driver and advocate for micro-credential that relates to flexible learning pathways. We have a committee that looks at micro-credential to plan, monitor. We have a specific entity within the university that moves the micro-credential agenda forward. And we have a committed subject matter expert that develop the module and the coursework for micro-credential. And more importantly, why it's so popular, there is profit sharing between the developer of micro-credential, the module developer, and the entity that's roll out the project as a whole. So there is a driver, there's a workhorse, there's people there, there's a business model, and then there's funding mechanism. So it's very popular with the industrial sector because it shortened the time that you need to get that skills and competencies. Now, this is an example of a statement that relates to micro-credentials. Yeah, it tells you the award, what kind of award, the subject, what does it relate to, specific qualifications, and then the quality assurance aspects of it, the modes of study, and the level of study, credits, hours of study, and so on and so forth. So every student that goes through a micro-credential course will be provided with this kind of statement. Yeah, this is an example of one private universities that's going forward in terms of the provision of micro-credentials, offering of micro-credentials. Now, if you look at the development of micro-credential in Malaysia as a whole, it started in 2019 when the Malaysian Qualification Agency decided that that is a good way to improve the capacity for Malaysia through a non-formal, flexible learning kind of pathways. And it has developed until now where we have improved the guideline for standalone micro-credential in that sense, meaning that you can pick up all the courses within the university or across universities and stack it up into a qualification or a skill competencies kind of thing. So that will shorten the period that you have to be in higher education institution. Okay, later I'll talk about this when the impact of micro-credential in the higher education sector planning as a whole. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Surratt. Oh, wrong one? Okay, thank you, Dr. Surratt. I want to ask one quick question of you before we ask you, Borhin, to come. Michaela spoke to quality assurance, accreditation, etc., and you did as well. There is a perspective that if you seek to accredit micro-credentials, that drives up the cost of delivery and the cost for learners to be able to access. The other perspective is accredit, for example, the degree or the overall program, and then the components would have that benefit. What is the approach being taken in Malaysia to this?
It is the second approach I'm talking about. Yeah, it doesn't increase the cost as compared to if you're doing a 4-year course kind of thing inside the campus in the university. This is very popular among the industry because they can be working in the industry. At the same time, they can be taking up all those courses within the universities, stacking up all the courses. So cost-wise, it is much cheaper and it's faster in that sense. Yeah, in order to develop the skill that is required by the industry.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you so very much. We want now to invite Dr. Borhin Chakrun, beg your pardon, Director, the Division for Lifelong Learning Systems at the UNESCO headquarters and Interim Director of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, to be able to now speak. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to share some of the perspective that would be more global perspective on how, at least from the analysis we are doing and from my own perspective, I see planning when it comes to skills development and to link with the labor market. And I would like to refer to some of the perspective that one is why education planning should change. I think we have some argument and you have been discussing them.
The second is what are the bottlenecks, at least when I see the landscape of TVET planning, and then some ideas for the way forward. I will try to keep with the time, of course. But maybe very quickly, if we can move to the first slides. First, I think it's interesting to look at the demography, and it's very important. And when we look at the global demography, we see that we have in 1990 quite large number of younger population in Africa and in Latin America and in Asia, and a working age population that is rather important in Europe and in Asia as well, and very few elder population. If we move to the next slide and looking at where we will be and where we ought to be in 2023, and you will see that the next slide, please. Next slide, click. You will see that we are moving toward much younger Africa and very important, but also an aging population and very and elder population in Asia, and particularly in Japan and in China, for example. The question is, of course, if you are planning and if you are taking a lifelong learning perspective, and I think it's very important in our discussion, I didn't hear that, but I think it's very important, is are we planning for schooling? And in that case, you'll be focusing back. You'll be focusing on who are going to school, or are we focusing on a lifelong learning perspective? In that case, you are taking into account workers, you are taking into account people who are disengaged from the labor market or getting back to the labor market, and all the dynamic that Professor was mentioning. So I think it's very important to take the demography dimension. But then if we move to the next slide and we look at the labor market dynamics, and in a continent like Europe, we have labor shortages with a quite deep shortage in some of the occupations, for example, in professional plant and machine operators. But when we look at the unemployment rate, we have very high unemployment rate, for example, in Middle East and North Africa. Africa as well, although in Africa we have a problem in terms of the data collection, but still we have different dynamics. And again, if you are a planner, are you planning to address shortages, or are you planning to get young people entering the labor market? The approach is not the same. And probably, again, the dynamic of in-service training versus continuing training and a lifelong learning perspective will be important. Otherwise, if you focus only on in-service training, you may miss the point of how you create micro-credentials, how you meet the demands from the labor market. Next, please. What is more impactful is that the technology is changing very fast, and the wave of technological change is impacting the labor market, the jobs and occupations. And again, while we were working on a pace of changes, and you are referring, Michaela, on the industrial development, we are in a pace of changes. A few months ago, and speaking about generative AI, and what are the implications on occupations? 2 days ago, ChatGPT issued a new set of resources that can be used for specific sectors, and that will impact occupations. So what are we doing? And the problem is not only how the labor market is impacted, is what is the pace of the transfer of technology? Because technology is not produced everywhere. There are some major companies that do control part of the technology, some countries. So what does it mean for a planner? Are we planning for immediate change in the labor market? Are we planning for anticipated change? Are we planning for something that we don't know, which is not related to our domestic economy? Next, please. The other aspect is the life cycle of companies has been changing and has been shrinking. And again, that means that new companies are coming, companies are dying, and people might lose jobs, people are getting new jobs. And that means more active and agile response to people who might need to enter the labor market for the first time, but people who have to change jobs very quickly. Next, please. I looked at the labor market forecasts and looked at particularly on the WEF, because the WEF every time they make quite important figures. And I mean, in a few years ago, they were making forecasts that by 2025 will be half tasks are covered by machines and half by human being. It's not true. I mean, we didn't get to that. Now they are making forecasts that will be by 2027, it will be around 66 and 37. And other things, 97 million versus 83 million. I think the point is that probably the prediction of change is there, and we are seeing change. It's the pace of change that is changing, and that is unpredictable. And again, if you are a planner in education, and not only about TVET, what are you planning for? How you manage with the uncertainty? And what element of planning you have to put in your overall framework to cope with these prediction, unprediction, new predictions? Next, please. I come to TVET because that's the discussion, at least from my perspective. In reality, we have a very little enrollment in TVET. Globally, we are around 5%, according to US statistics. It varies across the different continents. But when we are speaking about TVET, our mapping, global mapping, is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because in those data, we are collecting only vocational education data, enrollment. Vocational training is not covered. Non-formal training is not covered. Community learning center is not covered. Nothing is covered apart from upper vocational education. Next, please. So I think the point for us is that demography matters for planning. Context matters as well. And I didn't refer, for example, to informal economy. In many parts of the world, at least in middle and low income countries, 60% of economy is an informal. And it's a matter of how you understand it and how you capture and what are the demand for skills. But also the pace of transition matters. How fast is it? How we can manage with the pace that will happen very soon. Next, please. So what are the core bottlenecks? And I would like to move very fast on and slowing down these issues. If you can follow me. I think it's the framework of analysis that has to change from a very linear perspective on planning and of education, primary education to employment, and then a job and retirement, and then pension, and so disappearing from any need for opportunities for learning, to if we go to this second click, to something that is a much more lifelong learning perspective of the planning, and which first of all has to take into account that what happened in early child education will determine what happens in the learning performance. By today, we know that the first 1,000 days determine what we learn and how we learn. So we have to take this lifelong learning perspective when we are speaking about planning and we are speaking about skill development. But what is more important is that we'll have multiple career paths, and we'll get a job and we'll have changed jobs, and we have to change the career path. And it's there where we need more flexible learning pathways, we need micro-credentials, we need upskilling and reskilling. And that's part of the new planner, if I can say so. And how this is underpinned by career guidance and counseling that will support this transition from learning to work to learning, and how we cope with the information, because micro-credentials is a phenomena, it's growing, it's a jungle. Who understands today what is the landscape of micro-credentials? It's thousands of micro-credentials. Do you understand? Are they needed in the labor market? What is the revenue that you will get from getting those micro-credentials? It's very hard to do that at the level of university, not to speak about a country or at the global level. But what is important, and for me, the lifelong learning, is the life skills, is that when we retire, we don't withdraw from continuing learning. And I was showing the demography. Part of our societies will be living longer and older, and they will have to continue learning. We've seen that during the COVID. We have seen that for the digital economy. We see that also for the greening. So we need to keep this lifelong learning perspective. Next, please. I would like to go to the final recommendation because I know the chair. So the final slide is a suggestion regarding what's the way forward. So if you don't mind, if we can go to the very final one. What is must do? So if we go to must do. Yeah, okay. So I think that it's very important that first of all, we change the perspective, and in many cases is how we move from striving for recognition, for skills development, for technical and vocational education toward excellence, how we make TVET an excellent road for young people. It's very hard. It's very hard in terms of the attractiveness, in terms of creating those flexible learning pathways, making the link with the labor market. But I think this is very important, and how you enhance the link with the labor market, with companies. And we have some tools, but we need to develop them further. Probably is also placing TVET within a lifelong learning perspective is very important. Developing the capacities of planners and understanding better the labor market. And this is not something that is always done. And I think that IIEP can do a very great job there. But probably is also how we can leverage. And I've seen that you are discussing the data analytics, AI, because those are tools that can help us cope with the agile changing labor market and getting, I would say, up to minute, the information regarding the changes in the labor market. Probably looking at closely on the green and the digital transitions as main driver of economies, but also as main driver for human development. And define better the mix of occupation skills and what we consider foundational skills, what we consider transversal skills, what we consider job-specific skills, and what mix we can have in the programs, at what mix we can plan for it. And the integration of management information system and labor market information system is something that most of countries are failing to achieve, and I think that's very important to do. Now, making visible the good practices, I think IIEP, UNESCO Univoc platform, all the resources that we have should be able to help us drive these changes and work together to advance this agenda about the new planning or the planning for an unknown future. Thank you very much. That was excellent, Dr. Shakroon. Thank you. Thank you. I know the time pressure. We apologize for that, but we certainly know that you were able to communicate the critical issues. So, Dr. Martin, Dr. Sirat, as planners, has he complicated your life and work?
Yeah, I think he greatly complicates planners' life because in a way, and I think that's something that has come out very clearly in our discussions, is that as planners, we have to constantly adapt to the changing realities in our education sectors. In the post-secondary education sector, I think we are really nowadays talking about ecosystems. So we have all kinds of providers. We have short courses. We have, and there are also some people who think that the micro-credentials will replace the traditional provision. I don't think that at all. I think we will have just more diverse offers, which correspond to diverse needs. But how to plan for this, and for me, really, that poses also the question both as both the focus and the locus of planning. I think the locus will have to be much more decentralized. We will have. I would hope that we will have stronger planning at the level of higher education or post-secondary institutions. They will have to reach out to their local environments, to enterprises, jointly develop the training offer. We see that in micro-credentials. And I think Dr. Morshidi was also referring to that, that micro-credentials, they have to be strongly attuned to a particular competency need, and they have to respond to a need from the labor market. So then you have to reach out to the labor market, and you can't do this at the national level. I mean, that you can have broad-based consultation committees, and that is happening at countries. But when it really comes to planning the offer, I think you really have to do that at the level of institutions. And so we need a much stronger planning capacity there, I would assume, and to be able to reach out really to the environment, to the industry, and jointly plan with them. So that is one of the avenues I would want to underline.
Thank you. We discovered that micro-credential work best in collaboration with the industry because it fit well into the needs and requirement of industry. But in the case of Malaysia, we have this dilemma. We have our national education policy, which is about holistic student. It doesn't talk about the requirement of industry. Here we're faced with a situation where the industry is pressuring us. right, to produce the right set of workers with the right skills. But it doesn't complement with the national education policy that we have. So it's question of supply and demand, which does not meet equally well in terms of within the market context. So in Malaysia, we have that kind of issues that we've got to deal with, trying to balance the national education policy with the requirement of industry. How do you move forward to produce to graduate students that are required by industry as they come out without additional training for skills and so on and so forth. This is the thing that we are dealing with at the local level, at the national level.
Yeah, I think one aspect that we didn't discuss is the equity. And I mean, of course, I'm very conscious about the labor market demand and what we just discussed, but I think there is an agenda of equity and inclusion regarding micro-credentials that we have to emphasize. Today, in many countries in the world, still the people who are accessing higher education are people coming from the most advantaged socioeconomic background. If you are coming from low socioeconomic background, you don't get to higher education. But micro-credential can be that vector of offering access to higher education learning for people who wouldn't even dream about accessing higher education. So I think we need to take the economic dimension of micro-credentials, but I think we need also to take the equity and inclusion dimension and embed that in the strategies and the frameworks of micro-credentials. Otherwise, money goes to the rich, skills goes to the skilled people. And we know it. We know it from adult learning. We know that the people who are coming from low economic background have less access to adult learning and lifelong learning opportunities. So I think the equity and inclusion dimension is important. And last piece is the quality assurance dimension, because you are emphasizing about that. Today in France, for example, to include in the repository for qualification framework, qualification, it takes an assessment. How relevant is that qualification in the labor market? You have to demonstrate that people who get those qualifications, because you get temporary inclusion in the register, and then you have a full inclusion. So it takes an analysis. How relevant is that to the labor market? The cohort. That's not happening in micro-credentials. You may design a micro-credential and get it. And then the question, how you will ensure the quality assurance, how you demonstrate that this is relevant. And in all the studies, including our own studies, we have found information or evidence about the uptake. So Professor was mentioning 50,000, but we have very little evidence of the outcomes. And I think that's an aspect that the Institute and UNESCO and other colleagues will have to make emphasis on. What's the return on micro-credentials in terms of employment, in terms of social equity, and in terms of career path.
Correct, correct. Dr. Martin, is this an avenue for research?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an avenue for research, and there's this whole discussion about how to organize the quality assurance process. Yes. And again, here the issue comes up: where is the best locus for the quality assurance? And I'm just thinking about the discussions in the European context. Now there seems to be a kind of general consensus that, given the many numbers, of micro-credentials that we will have to deal with, we have to have higher education or post-secondary education who are able actually to ensure the quality assurance process, taking into account this labor market relevance beforehand that you have so rightly emphasized. But then we can think of national processes that look into how institutions organize their micro-credential provision, but we cannot think of national agencies and quality assuring every micro-credential. I think that in most countries we just explode the system, and so we have to find a balance here again. I think between institutional processes and national ones.
Correct. And I think that the critical in all of this, as we seek to ensure quality outcomes, and we have to know what the impact of these developments are, as you have said, is actually the cost associated with regulating and quality assuring. Because if that cost is high, the government authorities will have to pass it on to the institutions. Institutions then have to pass it on to the learners. or the government absorbs those costs. And then critically, as has been stated there by Dr. Shakroon, it might not necessarily achieve the ends of facilitating access and equity. We have a question from our online audience. Let's receive it now, please.
Super. We have a question from Suresh Munbod. How do we adjust our pre-university education to meet the demands of higher education and that of the middle level technicians?
I didn't hear it.
How do we adjust?
How do we adjust our pre-university education to meet the demands of higher education and that of the middle level technicians?
Okay, so it's essentially the lifelong learning perspective that Dr. Shakroon indicated on.
It is, I think it's lifelong, but I would be careful in saying how secondary will have to adapt to the, higher education. I think we have to be careful with that. But probably is about those learning pathways and how we build those learning pathways. We have in some countries bridging programs that are established to help students and learners catch up to enter into to meet the requirement. You mentioned the accreditation of prior learning. I think we need to take into account that some upper secondary graduate do enter the labor market and get skills, and they have to have those skills recognized and validated. When we look at the international data, there is a lot of discourse about accreditation of prior learning, but then there are few countries who manage it to reach scale. In Europe, France and Portugal have reached quite important number, but in other countries there is a lot of talk. There is much less numbers of people who are benefiting from these pathways. Maybe the last point I think is how we open more higher education is, I think, the critical question for us. Universities remain closed, and that's a talk that we need to advance as well.
Okay, what role is there then for education and training entities within the private sector or non-governmental communities? So, for example, alternative providers. What role is there for that group?
Well, we have in the higher education system polytechnics, and TVET providers. They are private and public. Employability is good, 80% plus, but our problem is income is not premium. So everybody is employed from polytechnics, from either private or public institution. But our issue now is they are not paid a premium income from the training they have gotten. So we're not talking about employability anymore in the case of Malaysia. It's about getting the premium income. So it doesn't matter whether it's private or public, but a private has an edge because they can adjust and adapt faster than public institution. Because being a government institution, the response rather slow. They need the infrastructure, they need the investment. But the public sector, the private sector will do it very fast. They don't have a lot of bureaucratic elements to come. So in that sense, there are opportunities in the case of Malaysia for the private sector to come in. Now, mind you, in the case of Malaysia, TVET is offered by no less than 100 agencies, both public and private, and in different ministries. That sometimes in the higher education sector, we're talking about higher TVET rather than the normal TVET that's being offered in the private sector. So in other words, from that sector, they can move into the Malaysian technical universities where they can get the higher qualification and secure a premium income from the normal TVET to the higher TVET in that sense.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, there's. Could you assist, please?
Thank you very much for the interesting talks. I have two questions for one from Dr. Martin and one for Dr. Shakroon. My name is Yasser Abdel Fattah. For Dr. Martin, my first question: in your current research on micro-credentials, do you have any idea or initial data on the perceptions of students or learners, rather say, perceptions of learners of the value that they would get from micro-credentials. This is one question. My question to Dr. Shakroun, I've been a practitioner in higher education, working on academic support, helping students develop study skills, academic writing. And one interesting point that you mentioned in your talk, is the link between industry and planners and also higher education institutions. And for example, I'd like to know your, if you have any ideas about how those stakeholders can benefit from tools like technology, forecasting, market intelligence, as you have mentioned, in order to feed into the curriculum design, designing better vocational training, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, our research in Mauritius is just starting, so we do not have data there yet. Even we just send out a survey, and the question of the learner, I think, is really important. And I have seen some pieces of research that show that the participants in the UK, from the UK, and also 2-3 other countries, which shows that the participants actually in the micro-credential learners are mainly those people who have already higher education. That is a little bit disheartening, because we have this kind of equity expectation from micro-credentials. We have seen the same thing with MOOCs, by the way. Yeah? We were hoping that MOOCs would be the breakthrough to, you know, democratizing learning. And what we have seen is those who have education already, a lot of education, they reach out more easily. Yeah? And so actually we have, I think, a big challenge here, because we strongly believe at UNESCO that micro-credentials should be an avenue for creating more learning opportunities, more equitable learning opportunities. Yet, it is really, I think there's a big question mark. How do we get the learners to know about them? So we have an information challenge for sure, but also feel entitled. That's for me. That's also, you know, not this kind of, you have always often in education, you know, higher education is not for me, or let's say other types of it's not for me, it's for the others. So this kind of perceptions. And I think that is really a big challenge. Maybe you want to add on that?
Thank you. I think before I come to your question, if you don't mind, sir, I would like to put this point on the right to lifelong learning. In 1960, when we adopted the Convention on the Right to Education, half of the children of the world were not going to school. Today, we still have challenges of people and young people not accessing or dropping from education. So it doesn't mean that the right to education is fulfilled. And we know challenge, we have 250 million young people who are out of school. So, but still, I think we are in an era. And I was trying to explain that we are in an era where lifelong learning is not a luxury. It's not something that is a right for all of us, because the labor market is changing. Because even when we get older, we will need to continue learning. So I think, and that's what UNESCO is working on an agenda on the evolving right to education, to place lifelong learning at the center of, and some countries have established, countries like France has established a learning account. Other countries have, Singapore has established the lifelong learning entitlement for all citizens. So we see those developments that are happening, and I think that's the direction that we need to take. But this is a road to take, because the right to lifelong learning is not only an educational matter, it's also a labor market matter, it's an economic matter. So it has to have a whole of government approach. Now, on the question on the link with the labor market, I think for a planner, maybe I need to be provocative here. If I take the dual system, you cannot be in TVET if you don't have a workplace opportunity. Yes. It's the case also in France. If you are doing, I go to higher education, if you are doing a professional master in apprenticeship, which is my son has done it, you cannot get place in the university, or you cannot stay if you don't find a workplace. So basically, the match is 100%. Either you are in workplace opportunity and you are in the higher education master, professional master in this case, or you are not. But that's an extreme model, with respect to Michael, of course. The dual, but is that link with the labor? How much universities, technical and vocational education training, want to get integrated with the labor market and the world of work? How much this investment is done in terms of the governance of universities, in terms of organizing the program? I think the more there is a close to the labor market, the more there would be better matching with the demand from the labor market. But again, we have to take into account the equity and inclusion matter. Is that my son get the workplace because we have a network that helped us getting an opportunity for him. But if you are coming from the suburb of Paris, you will have a lot of difficulty to find a workplace, even not for higher education, even if you are a vocational training students. And the last piece is that access to higher education doesn't mean success.
Correct.
Again, sorry to refer to France, but we are in France in terms of the data. Only 3% of vocational education training students who access higher education graduate with the first diploma from university. Only 3%. What does it mean? That means that the students who go through the vocational training path are not prepared for higher education, and they are deemed to fail. And that means you have to invest in what you are requesting earlier, or colleague. We need to invest more in the foundational learning. We need to invest more in the cognitive skills that will allow people to succeed.
Correct.
Otherwise, we are offering them a myth, and that's not the road to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent, Dr. Chakroun. Dr. Martin, 30 seconds. How does this affect IIP's training education processes for planners with respect to the lifelong learning matter? Is it being integrated? Should it be integrated? That lifelong perspective.
Yeah, actually, we have developed already a course jointly with UIL, UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, on how to plan for lifelong learning. So I think quite a bit of thinking has gone into the planning perspective. So yes, it affects our work. But as you said, it's and also the question that what was asked about, it has actually implications at all levels of the education chain. You have to think about basic education systems which are emphasizing foundational learning for sure. We have also to train. We have to use methodologies which train people to take up new knowledge. Like we have to train lifelong learners already in the school system. So I think that is really something which is really important. And yes, and that so I think there are many implications for planning.
So thank you for that. But is that just a specialization, or will it be infused? So do you see the situation whereby all persons who participate in your training will have this lifelong perspective integrated?
Yeah, we have also,
Yeah.
I have a number, I immediately pop up some concrete things that we have been doing. For instance, I was in charge of a module on education sector diagnosis, and we have looked we have updated the methodology, inserting questions to what extent education systems integrate a lifelong learning perspective. So this is really something that comes already at the diagnostic stage. It's something that comes at the planning stage. So I think to a certain extent, we are taking it up, but I think we can do more also.
Okay. Thank you so very much. I think that we have had a rich discussion, and if there are no other questions, let us clap and say, thank God. Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Yes, it is. We were at 5:24.
So hello again. I think this is the end. No? So I'm not going to repeat these 2 days of very intensive, provocative, and very motivated debates we had. But let me at least cover 3 important things before going to the celebration of with the cocktail and all of that. In the first place, I think we have been very clear on recognizing the tradition of this institution, the importance of the work that the previous staff, previous director helped a lot to construct the prestige of this institution. And I think that has been recognized by, not by us, no? but external voices, no? Alumni, ministers, cooperation, and all the others that participate in this meeting. As a result of this prestige, I mean, we had very good participation on the meeting. I have here some statistics. Yesterday, for example, we had 1,050 unique viewers during the first day of the conference. No? And so I think that's very important and also very challenging for us. No? And we have to take that as a responsibility. But at the same time, I think we all agree, and I think Sarah was very clear with that in the morning, that we cannot stay in our zone of comfort, no? Because things have changed, because we have new challenges, because our work is related to helping countries with our expertise. So we have to have always the need for learning, for improving, for doing research, getting new ideas about what we have to do. So I like the way that my colleague Amélie refers to that. We have to do more, to do differently, and to do better. I mean, that's a good integration of what we have to do, and to be always with the motivation for innovating and recognizing the tradition, but knowing that things have changed, we have new challenges, and we have to, I would say the more, and I talk about this in the yesterday morning, our big challenge is to try to get to the classroom, to educational institutions with all our planning and management instruments. And we have this challenge. That challenge continue to be present, as it was also in the 60s, as we recognized yesterday, and also it has been persistent over time. So we have to continue and also to do a lot of efforts to do more, better, and differently. And try to get to some of these outcomes that also have been referring during these 2 days, no? Radical inclusivity, the bottom of the pyramid, employability. So there are a lot of different outcomes that we still have to persist in trying to get them. Definitely to have priorities. I mean, it's a good message for the community. We are developing expertise in 6 key topics for governments and societies. We have been discussing all of them: transparencies, gender and inclusion, skills, digital technologies, the learning crisis, the response to emergencies. So I think we already are in the good track for addressing the challenges. Some of this development began 20 years ago, as it was recognized by Leonora in the previous panel. Some others are just beginning, and we have always to be open to the possibility to continue refining and looking for new challenges related to education. But also, some other ideas came during these 2 days. For example, the idea of promoting more agile planning approaches in a period of volatility and predictability. That's very strong message during these 2 days. Refocusing on learning and classroom experience, building on the middle tier, as well as the institutional level for addressing learning, higher education issues, for example. Also, this idea of recognizing the innovative potential of local actors, civil societies, which is also very important. And also we need to think about some of the politics that is related to the relationship between governments and civil societies. I think politics is important because we need to combine people, combine organizations, combine other scholars. So we cannot say that we have to move politics out of the debate. I mean, it's there for budgeting purposes, for example. There are different positions, and at the end, the ministers have to get an approval of the budget, so you have to do a lot of discussions and debate. But it's true that we have to avoid to put in the front of the discussion the ideologies. So that's something that I think is important to be clear, that we have to avoid that and do not lose the perspective of always think about the centrality of our objectives are the students. And that's something that I think is important to take into account each time that we are going to begin a process such a sectoral plan, a sectoral analysis, that there is a lot of politics on that, because you have to decide how to link resources to priorities in every country. And finally, this idea of the multi-level planning, as it was rephrased by Michaela tonight, I think it's very important to recognize that there is planning in different contexts of the educational experience, not only at the level of the governments, but it's the need of coordination, articulation. I think the IEP has begun that process with the micro-planning processes. I think we have to do more efforts in articulating this micro-planning process with the macro-planning processes. But I think we are on that directions. And also this idea of connecting the urgent issues. Today, we call them humanitarian issues, with development perspectives. This idea of connecting short-term and long-term perspective. That's also something that we have to always promote. So I think we have a lot of things to reflect. Let me pass to the second idea that I wanted to share. So what is the follow-up of all of this? The first is that we have to decide our operational plan for the next governing board. So I think there are some ideas here that I will try to put on the plan. But also we are going to begin to think about our next strategy in 2024. So we can say that in next year we can begin to test some idea and then to arrive to a more informed decision making related to the next strategy. But also, I mean, we have the plan to publish a book. I hope that's not going to be 300 pages. That's some of our colleagues were referring that we have to change that, but we are going to think how to do this. But I think it's very important to put all our efforts and your efforts in a publication and disseminate that to different local actors at national and international level. And finally, I want to thank first to all the speakers that have traveled from all the regions of the world and produced in a short time frame presentation, but also written papers. Thank you very much for all of that. All country representative ministers, head of planning, ambassadors, general secretaries of national commissions, UNESCO delegations to the General Conference, partners that have joined us during those 2 days and largely helped enrich our discussion and exchange. To my colleagues from all IIEP 3 offices that have contributed both in terms of substance and organization, this was yesterday, but I'm going to mention all of that because I think it's important. I want to thank first to Muriel, of course, a great intellectual organization and good coordination. We have been discussing this since I arrived here at the IIEP 7 months ago. Thank you very much. And then to the team, to Muriel's team, Camila, Andrea, somewhere, Fanshu, the other Camila, Alexandra, and Julia, our Master of Ceremonies, Rob, former editor of IIEP, and then Christine, Cherezade, Sandrine, Melina, Anaí, Fred, Maria, Aurore, Polani, Sandrine, Ramatulay, Emily, Amaranta, Lorraine, Olivia, Ludivine, Ella, Lynn, Nina, Eva, Kun, Jerome, Mamadi, who is here with us, and then Philippe, Yonshin, the photographer, former data analysis of IIEP, and then Narit, Vincent, France, our administrative team, Fred, Rita, Emmeline, Stefan, Kaja, Claude, Barbara, Candy, Corinne, and of course to our interpreters that I think are here, Nadia, Raúl, Beatriz, Gisela, Jacqueline, Melanie, Michelle, Rachel, and Victoria. Thank you very much for all of you. And finally, I think we have been going through different challenges this year, complex challenges, other nice challenges. We have organized our 25th anniversary in Buenos Aires, a very successful meeting with a lot of stakeholders, ministries, international cooperation, good discussion with the participation of our colleagues here, also Gil, Silvia, Manos on that meeting. We also had we have a like kind of a retreat in September where we brought together our colleagues from Dakar, Buenos Aires, in Paris to discuss a lot of things related to how to work more globally, how to improve quality assurance, how to develop priorities, etc., etc. With this seminar, also a lot of challenges related to that. We still have our governing board in December, but I think Pauline and Sarah will help us to do it smoothly. I hope so. And just to tell you that in all of this, we demonstrate that when we do things together, the results are good. So that's for me is very important. In the lunch, I was with colleagues and they told me, "Are you happy?" I said, "Yes, I'm very happy. I'm more happy than the first day." Because my first day was not very nice days. You know, I arrived to IIEP and this was a day of teleworking. So it was empty, the institution. No? So I said, my friends in my country were asking me, how was your first day? I said, I think I arrived to a very strange institution. No? And but I'm learning also about telework and all of that. But I'm very happy with the new demonstration of how important it is to work together. And you know that that's very important for me. And I hope that this will continue improving in a way that we can address all the next challenges that we have in the future. So thank you very much to all of you. And now I think it's time for Rob to say something. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. And it sounds like I have a new position to report to on Monday. Well, I think everyone has been thanked, but let's also just extend a thanks to our participants online who have joined us and have been so active over the course of these 2 days. I would like to remind everyone to please fill in our guest book. You can access it via the QR code on your badge, various ones around the room, or via the chat if you are online. And all the recordings, all of the resources will be made available in due course directly to you or shared in the chat. So that marks the end of the symposium. There is one thing left to do, and that is to go upstairs and enjoy a slice of cake and a drink. And I'll leave you with one question that is perhaps slightly less important than the ones asked here today. How are they going to fit 60 candles on the cake? So please, if you're staying with us, that would be wonderful. Let's go and have a drink upstairs and enjoy your evening. Thank you. One more thing, please leave your headsets in the room. Thank you. Please do not take your headsets home.